All right, we are going to go ahead and get started.
Thanks for trying to help me.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Oh, good. I'm just bouncing around. My daughter from Boston's been in town, and I've had guests. Okay. I might show up tonight to sit and watch. She said, well,
All right. Welcome to the Education and Youth Committee. My name is Councilman Zeke Cohen. I am chairman of the committee. I'm joined tonight by our vice chair, Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark.
Thank you, sir.
By Councilman Christopher Burnett. By Councilman John Bullock.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Leon Pinkett.
Mr. Chair.
Staff to the committee, Marguerite Curran. We are also joined tonight from the mayor's office, Mr. Matthew Stegman and Nina Themelis. We are joined, Themelis?
Femelis.
Apologies.
The
We
Baltimore name.
are also joined tonight by, from the law department, Elena DePietro. Thank you for being here this evening, as well as many special guests that I will introduce soon. Tonight's hearing is focused on the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. Wanted to quickly open up by just introducing the importance of BCYF. We know that this is an incredibly innovative way to do grant making in our city. We know that Baltimore has historically not always operated through an equity lens in how we've done philanthropy. And what is powerful about the Children and Youth Fund is that it truly engages in the work of supporting organizations that are grassroots, that are on the ground. It uses an equity lens. It is community-based participatory budgeting. You know, we think a lot about how do grassroots folks have a voice, not only in the receipt of funds, but also in how those funds are distributed. And so we on this council have a lot of pride when then council president, now Mayor Jack Young, introduced it. He and we ended up having to override a veto from a previous mayor. There's been a ton of work to get us to where we are, and I see this as an incredibly important project for the city of Baltimore that we must continue to fund through an equity lens. There must be community participation, the focus on intergenerational work, knowing that historically our young people have been really underfunded in this city. So we know that this youth fund is critically important. Look, we know that there have been challenges, there have been stumbles along the way. At the same time, this is important work that Mayor Young, this council, many of the folks who are here tonight are engaging in partnership. So again, I want to thank all the folks who've come out tonight. I know that we have Kaylin Young from President Scott's office. I know that the president will be joining us shortly over here as well. But all that to say, this is an important project for our city, and so we want to continue to strengthen it and to continue to lean into the good work that is happening, as well as identify the areas where we need to improve in anticipation of what comes next for the Youth Fund. So with that, I did want to start by recognizing some of the young people that are here tonight and have them, as is our tradition in this committee, really lead us off. So I'm going to begin by hearing from two folks that are in grant receiving organizations. We're going to hear first from Kenny Moss with the Baltimore Compost Collective, and then we're going to hear from Miguel Hernandez, who's with Mi Espacio and Casa de Maryland. So Kenny, come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Kenneth Moss. I'm the youth composter for the Baltimore Compost Collective. At the Baltimore Compost Collective, we are a youth-led food scrap collection service. We have 77 customers where we pick up from their front doorstep. We get them a 5-gallon bucket with a bio bag, and we pick it up their front doorstep or their back doorstep. We collect on a weekly basis every Sunday at 9 o'clock, where we divert 400 to 500 pounds of food scraps and divert on a weekly basis, and on a yearly basis, we divert 8 tons. Good afternoon, everyone, again. My name is Kenneth Moss. I'm a youth composter for the Baltimore Compost Collective. I have been employed with the Baltimore Compost Collective for over a year. I have never been late or never missed a day. Being employed with the Baltimore Compost Collective, funded through the Youth Fund, I've gained social skills, time management skills, composting skills, and public speaking. Before I was employed with the Baltimore Compost Collective, I was a Be More Beautiful block captain, where I picked up trash around different neighborhoods, but mainly Brooklyn and Curtis Bay. And I also picked up trash in my block and my alley. For 3 years, I have been employed by YouthWorks. Last year, Councilman Zeke Cohen came to the Filbert Street Garden, and I gave him a tour, and he gave me an opportunity to work with him and his staff and his constituents, shadowing some of his meetings and taking pictures. So thank you to Councilman Zeke Cohen. Also through the mentorship with Councilman Zeke Cohen, I had a chance to talk on the Dr. K show. Big shout out to Dr. K. I can't wait to come back to teach her about composting. I'm also a scholar at Benjamin Franklin High School, where I maintain a 3.0 average. I have my own photography business, Kenny Captures, just a kid with a camera. You can reach me on Instagram at kenny.captures or on Twitter, captureskenny. The reason why the Youth Fund is so important to me and the youth of Baltimore City, because it gives us an opportunity to trade in workforce development in different areas, earn money, and networking skills. In my case, I had a bunch of amazing opportunities. My work at the Baltimore Compost Collective is so important because I make soil enhancer for residents that don't have access to green space. I live in the most toxic neighborhood in the country, where we have 3 incinerators. One that burns medical waste, trash from another state, and Bresco, the Wheelabrator, where the city pays them $10 million to create $55 million in health issues. We're going to work on that. Composting is the alternative. You can reach us at the BaltimoreCompostCollective.org and join our campaign. And remember, learn so you don't hurt the burn, starve the incinerator, feed the soil, feed the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny, and thanks for your excellent work, both the work you've done with my office, but more importantly, as part of the Baltimore Compost Collective and really leading the way on the need for compost. I also want to bring up Miguel Hernandez, who is with Mi Espacio. Before Miguel comes up, I want to recognize Henry Raymond, Director of Finance. Thank you for being here, as well as Tisha Edwards, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, as well as Lester Davis, also with the Mayor's Office.
Good afternoon to all who are present. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the council members for opening this opportunity for me. My name is Miguel Hernandez, and I participate in CASA's after-school program, Mi Espacio. I am in the 10th grade, and I started with CASA Mi Espacio last year when I was a 9th grader. This program really impacted my grades. My ability to learn English. I receive homework support every day during program, and also make me a better chemistry and geometry student. As an ISO student, I used to fall very behind from school but since I met Mi Espacio, they helped me to reach my grades up. I've been able to learn new methods and improve my grades, as also I started to dream about my future. And this dream started to become real last year when I met Mi Espacio. Mi Espacio also gave me the opportunity to have an internship at summer, which this internship was based on architecture. When I was little kid, I was always dreaming to become a police officer. But according to the internship, my mind gets open, and now I'm running for civil engineer. I would like to become a civil engineer thanks to the internship that I had. Now in this year, I'm not just focusing on finishing on time. Now I'm planning my future on going to college. I am very thankful. I am very thankful for the motivation that Casa and Mi Espacio gave me. Without it, I couldn't think I will be where I am today. I am so excited for my future, and I am very grateful for the opportunity. Thanks again to the council members and Mi Espacio.
Thank you, Miguel. And again, wanted to start just by hearing from some of our young people who have benefited from the Youth Fund. And so Kenny and Miguel, I know it's not easy speaking on the mic, but thank you for what you're doing and for leading us off tonight. With that, I want to recognize and bring up Davon Love to give us sort of the conceptual beginning and purpose behind the fund. And Davon has served as the coordinator of community outreach for BCYF.
All right. Thank you, Chairman, Committee, General Public. What I want to do just for a few moments is kind of recap the conceptual frame of the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund, talk a little bit about just some high-level issues that the Youth Fund is attempting to address, and then just kind of give a preference to the panels that will come behind me that will talk more about the specific mechanics of how the Youth Fund is operating, what the next steps are. So as was noted earlier, there was a task force that was convened in February of 2017 by then Council President, now Mayor Jack Young. And this task force gave a really specific charge. And one of the things that was most important about the charge they gave was the recognition of the way in which the ecosystem of grant making was inequitable. And the inequitable nature of the ecosystem of grant making, there was a need that emerged really from conversations that were had after the uprising in 2015, where there were conversations about the inability of resources to get to the community. And so that was something that was a central part of what the task force sought to address in the charge that they gave to the council in the development of the ordinance that became the enabling legislation for the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund. When we talk about what are some of those gaps in the ecosystem, because I think in many contexts, we may see young people and we see them at the end, right, where the program has been done, right, where the young people have benefited from it. But there are operational and programmatic aspects to programs being successful that are, quite frankly, the least sexy part of talking about what it means to really empower youth. And so when we talk about those operational and programmatic aspects, we're talking about the fact, for instance, that you have many organizations and even just loose formations that may not be incorporated, that if you wanted to give them large sums of money, there is not the sufficient infrastructure for them to be able to receive those dollars, right? And so in addition to the fact that there aren't enough anchors or containers for organizations like that who are interested in getting those opportunities, there isn't enough capacity for such containers. You know, many, we refer to them as fiscal sponsorship opportunities, right? And then unfortunately, there hasn't been enough investment in fiscal sponsorship in order to be that bridge between organizations that start off as an idea and then how they transition to be a fully functional organization. And you even have organizations that have been functioning for a while, but because many of them have not consistently received resources, right? Many of the administrative and back office practices are such that they wouldn't be eligible for the kinds of dollars that would allow them to scale up. So it creates a dynamic where community-based organizations are competing with traditionally big white-led nonprofit organizations who are able to monopolize the resources that are often given. And the monopolization of those resources create a competitive disadvantage for people, particularly those that are closest to the community, that are up and from the neighborhoods, that are impacted by the issues we're trying to address. And so the purpose of the Youth Fund was to build out an infrastructure, right, to provide an intervention into that ecosystem where organizations were provided with the capacity building and technical assistance needed to be able to transcend some of the limitations that exist in the current ecosystem. And the reason why that's so important, again, is because those are the things that make youth programming possible in the city. If you talk to anybody who's had an idea that wants to work with kids in the school system, for instance, and you talk about all the things that are just necessary to be in the classroom with young people, right? There are a bunch of just administrative things that you need. And so there are a lot of people that get locked out of doing things that are just really important, that all of us would say are good, but again, the least sexy things that aren't often talked about in the public sphere. What you're going to hear from the panels that come after, you're going to hear from Associated Black Charities that's going to talk more directly about the administration, being the temporary fiscal agent of the Youth Fund, and talk about some of the management of it. One of the things that I want to highlight is that one of the things that, as the team that has been working on this has discovered over the past couple of years, that innovating in this way, particularly with public dollars, creates a very tricky political and operational challenge. Because if you're innovating using public dollars, you have a public system that wants accountability for how those dollars are spent. And there is tension in certain ways between that and the kind of flexibility necessary to be able to get dollars into the hands of folks who are trying to get. So it's not that it's impossible, but it's just very tricky because these systems are not built in such a way that balance has been struck. And so I think a lot of what you'll hear from ABC in terms of the successes and challenges have to do with having to navigate just the balance. People want to know how their dollars are being spent, but we also want to make sure that the burdens are not so onerous that those who aren't accountants, those who aren't experts in administration, have an opportunity to do the work that they can effectively do with the community. Lastly, what I'll say before I turn it over to Associated Black Charities is just to also recap just some of the mechanics as it relates to the enabling legislation and the legislation that we hope to get passed that'll establish a permanent intermediary. So as many of you know, in December of 2017, this body passed an ordinance that enabled Associated Black Charities to serve as the temporary fiscal agent of the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund, also tasking ABC with building the permanent intermediary. And those are two different, very different tasks that in many respects require a tremendous amount, their own kind of separate attention and resources. And it's important to note that the administrative cap that was in that piece of legislation, 10%, and one of the things I want the public to know, and I want you all to know, because I think there's some people that see that administrative fee as like money that is pocketed as a result of the services rendered and serving on the Youth Fund. It's important for the public to know that that 10% is actually the monies that is available to do the work. And so that's important because that administrative cap, when you think about what it takes to administer an 84 grantee portfolio and to build an entirely new institution that'll serve as the container for the Youth Fund, you got to deal with HR, you have to deal with, a search committee for hiring leadership, you have to think about the fiscal controls that are necessary. So these are two very different tasks, and ABC was tasked to do both of those things simultaneously. And so what the work that has been done is to both administer the first round of funding, but also to build this this permanent intermediary. And what you'll hear after Associated Black Charities are a presentation from one of the interim board members, along with the legal counsel for the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund Incorporated, that will eventually, given the ordinance that'll be before you, transition into being the permanent intermediary. One of the last things that I'll say that I think is important in putting in its proper perspective, in the legislation that we will propose to the council, the board members that have been selected for Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund, Inc. are folks that in some way, shape, or form were a part of the process of either administering the youth fund, doing some of the community outreach. These will be folks that will serve as interim board members for 18 months. This gives the board the opportunity to engage the public on how the board is constituted. The ordinance will not require that those bylaws are permanent upon passage of the legislation, and it will give the interim board the ability to develop the bylaws with community input and community participation, such it maintains the spirit of the youth fund, which is community participation in how it is governed. And so that will be before you, hopefully soon, to engage in the transition. And eventually, once this permanent intermediary is then by statute designated the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund that have received the dollars, they will then absorb the work of Associated Black Charities that they've been doing in managing this current cohort. So with that, I guess we'll bring up Diane Bell-McCoy from Associated Black Charities.
Thank you, Damon.
Thank you very much. I actually want, before I begin in terms of a formal presentation, although I do want to say thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to all the council members this evening. I wanted to play this video first, and thinking, as you thought, we wanted to feature the grantees first. And so that's what you'll see in just a moment.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Jamie, anything we can do to help her?
Apologies for the technical difficulties. There you go.
What's up, y'all? My name's Omni Spade. I'm here at Conscious Heads. I'm 17 years old, and I was a part of the boot camp. The boot camp, it really helped me out. It helped me solidify my confidence, you know, cutting hair, because I've been cutting for a minute, but I feel like I wasn't as confident. But coming here helped me become more confident and like learn the processes of cutting hair to like make sure you have the right techniques and the right pressure and everything, you know what I'm saying? So yeah. Hey man, what's going on? It's Noval. I'm here with Conscious Heads. I'm actually in my second semester of barbering, but I'm real confident. I actually feel like I'm finished. I've been going through heads a lot. It's like it's just him, but he's so hands-on. He's everywhere at one time, so he gonna get his work in with you. Like, you can have a class with 8 people, he gonna make sure that you get your work in.
So the importance of the Baltimore City Youth Fund, it helps us to be able to fund young barbers. I mean, when people come in, they would normally pay for my program, a very small amount, but still they still have to pay. And what we do is we're able to buy them equipment that they need in order to do the barbering craft. There is probably over like $600-700 in just equipment that they need, that the Baltimore City Youth Fund is actually able to provide for my barbers, for my young barbers that's coming up. So we really appreciate being able to have that, be able to have the staff available to be able to help train our youth fund class. So you know, we use all of that. We develop more programs. You know, we actually been able to buy more equipment for training. You know, just things of that nature. So the youth fund has definitely helped us to be able to bring people who again couldn't afford the barbering class, or even my barbering boot camp, but to be able to bring them through and be able to provide that service for free, that training for free, to be able to help our community and help young people who were trying to find a career that they were trying to enter into, and you know, to be able to, you know, close that gap.
I'm here because throughout my life, my mom was a single parent and we were homeless, and I seen a lot of stuff in my environment that I did not like as I was younger, at a young age, and I felt like I wanted to do something about it.
That's a great experience to get down. Like I learned how to like use tools, just being like little things like tools, I guess. Like I learned how to like how to use like power drills and all that type of stuff better. Just being out here like doing little things out here in the lot.
I'm here this summer because I felt like this is a good opportunity for me to make a change in my community, which it will start. I wish I could change the whole city, but it's a start.
You know, one of the ideas to promote crime and safety was basically just like getting a vacant space and turning it into something positive, because like a lot of the reasons kids get into bad things nowadays because they don't really got much else to do, because you know, schools don't have open gyms no more, the basketball courts ain't really so safe to go to, so kids don't really got that much to do, so they get into the wrong things.
I work with United Workers, so I've been doing this for a couple years now, since 10th grade. I've been working with Towson, and then working with Towson and carried on to 11th grade, and I was in this group called Crime and Safety with my homeboy Antonio and the girl Andrea, and we was working on like this. The idea with the lot, it came up with us, so that's when we should start working together, start building stuff, and try to make a playground, make it safe for kids and stuff like that.
Hi, my name is Tarek Thompson. I'm a youth leader from Cherry Hill, and I've been working here to do a lot, actually. I launched the Zero Waste Challenge when I was still in high school while working with United Workers. We brought up the top zero waste expert Gary List, and we went to a lot of meetings talking about plans on how we can help save Baltimore and make it into a zero waste society, you know, into a zero waste city.
So the Baltimore City Youth Fund is something that has supported the existing work that's been going on in communities in South Baltimore for decades, before any of us here were involved. But particularly it's been in support of the strong youth leadership that has emerged at Benjamin Franklin High School, first in response to a plan to build the nation's largest trash burning incinerator less than a mile away from their school. So I'm proud that our city has recognized that youth are stepping up, that they're taking on power, and has actually dedicated resources to support youth to open up questions and build spaces to take seriously the issues in their neighborhood and to work together. So the Youth Fund has been an incredible resource that has strengthened the work that's already been going on here in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. That is the video in terms of wanting to share a few more about the activities of the Youth Fund in terms of from the actual youth and the grantees' perspective. And I also want to acknowledge in terms of, I'm going to remember his name correctly, Corey, in terms of from Conscious Heads Barber, who is in the back of the room, in terms of, I want to acknowledge him here this evening. And we've already heard the young people in terms of from the compost in terms of, and they were surprised to see themselves featured in terms of on the video. But again, good evening, and it is both my honor and pleasure to come before you this evening, and I'm going to start by also just introducing myself in terms of Diane Bell McCoy, President and CEO of Associated Black Charities. And for those of you that may not know, Associated Black Charities' core focus is about closing the racial wealth gap economic mobility for African American citizens in Baltimore by addressing racialized barriers, by addressing structural racism that serves as a barrier in terms of practice in the workforce ecosystem, in terms of changing that economic outcome in the city of Baltimore. And so that's who we are, but we also found ourselves in this position in terms of being able to offer a role in this interim role, which will end June 30th, 2020, in terms of serving as an interim fiscal agent. But in many ways, as I was sharing with Councilman Clark, in terms of we kind of serve as a temporary home in terms of this beginning. And so serving in that temporary home, I want to also begin by offering this council and our current mayor, who was at the time the president of the city council, as Councilman Cohen already noted, you need to be clear that you should be congratulating yourselves. I do not know that this council or this government is aware of how innovative this fund is. And in fact, this fund is being watched across the country in terms of almost no one has been able to successfully put in place a fund in terms of grant making, moving government dollars into a philanthropic framework, and government dollars in terms of innovation of it being driven by the community. And so that very core basic of saying that you want to move this agenda, you want to create a model that in fact would be driven by the community in terms of from the beginning throughout the process is something that has not been successful anywhere in the country. But equally so, you indicated that you wanted to make sure it had taking the task force recommendations, community voices, that you wanted to make sure it included a strong component of capacity building. Because as Davon Love indicated in terms of that ecosystem, what's not in place? Just not in place as it relates to government dollars, it's not in place as it relates to philanthropic dollars in this city. And so that's a gap that in fact, over time, this fund will fill in terms of having a much more robust infrastructure that will change the future for youth beyond years to come as this framework is established. And so again, I don't know that you sitting here sometimes, often in our own backyard, do not realize the innovation that you claim in terms that you actually designed and developed and moved forward. But I also want to be clear about this innovation in terms of what is to accomplish in terms of the long-term goals. I know the push in terms of around getting the dollars out the door, but I think also as Davon shared with you in terms of what that means if we're able to keep moving this forward, putting the infrastructure in place, what it means long-term. And so clearly what it means long-term is we actually are, the goals are to increase that investment in those historical underrepresented communities and the children and youth who live there. We don't have that infrastructure currently. In terms of we want to make sure that we elevate authentic youth and community leadership. That's not done in terms of on a regular, ongoing basis. And we want to make sure we use this to develop the leaders of color in this city and the community-based leaders. And this is the other unique portion that why I think the community, the task force, recommended that ABC be that interim role, and certainly that was supported by the council. This innovation of this fund also says that its important value is racial equity and inclusion. That is a buzzword that is going across the country right now. But about making that real takes a lot of work to make that real in terms of happening in our communities. But also about making sure that we move this forward with a set of accountability. And I think Davon talked about that in terms of, I'll talk a little bit more about that, the tension of accountability with innovation and government dollars. They don't always go together. And so that I know that you'll hear later from a number of the grantees, and you'll hear later in terms of from a number of the grantees where in fact there are challenges that in terms of administering the fund and some of the challenge of trying to do that and keeping those elements of accountability. And before I begin to talk about those elements of accountability in terms of that, I do just want to stop one moment to point out one other grantee and a product of that other grantee in terms of Jubilee Arts, in terms of their jobs component. And I want to point that out because I am wearing a t-shirt from them. And it's called Black Before It Was Cool. And the neat part about this is that I actually went to a African American economic holiday mart sponsored by Baltimore Racial Justice Action that vendors from across the city. And the Jubilee Arts was there, and the youth were selling their t-shirts. I later learned and met the mother of the young lady who actually made the t-shirt and learned more about the program, and that they actually get to keep some of the profits from their product when they develop a new product in terms of the t-shirt. That's a part of the entrepreneurship development for the youth. And so I wanted to celebrate them as well, since I brought one of the t-shirts. And so I think, again, that more and more you're hearing both from the young people themselves, from the video, from the t-shirt, that you know that there are things that are working in terms of actually happening with the fund, in terms of the community, in terms of the youth. But I also would tell you, innovation out of this fund shows up in lots of different ways. And I want to go to that before I talk about the challenges. The innovation, in terms of that you asked for, that was a part of the task given to us, is that it also said that before the work began, there was an expectation that to design a fund wouldn't just come out of our heads. That to design a fund, you wanted to make sure baseline national research was conducted, that best practice information was gathered, that wasn't just go out, open the doors. It was be clear that it was based in a solid foundation of data that you actually looked to see what worked or what didn't work, so we could try to not make those same mistakes. It was clear that you said that you wanted to make sure that there was a plan in place about being able to make sure the community continued to be involved. You wanted to make sure that data would guide this fund as it continued to roll forward and move even into its permanent intermediary. You wanted to make sure participatory budgeting was a piece of this. You wanted to make sure that citizens were involved, including the selection of the grantees. In fact, part of the framework that came from the task force said very clearly you didn't want the interim intermediary even involved in the selection of those grantees. This was to be removed from it. We were removed from it. You wanted to make sure that we took advantage of fiscal sponsorship that existed. And as Davon shared, in terms of what we knew about the ecosystem in Baltimore, they weren't robust systems in place. And so you wanted the research, where do robust systems exist elsewhere? How do we create them? How do we model after that? You then wanted that information and thought it was important that all that be shaped. How does equity show up? Not just the buzzword equity. How does equity show up across the board? And I'll talk about that a little later in terms of what that particular challenge means for this government, to say that this is a piece you want in place, an innovation in the fund, but what does that mean? But that was what you said you wanted, the foundation. You wanted to see that happen first. But you also said at the same time that given the time constraints, that you wanted to make sure that the fund moved out the door quickly. You wanted innovation, and you wanted the framework, and you wanted the base, you wanted the research, but move the money out quickly in terms of, and you want to have the process that produce deep and broad community engagement, including the youth, to identify the program priorities. So many of you participated in some of those early 6 community design sessions where there were youth and there were practitioners and there were adults from across the city in terms of it came to share what they thought were the important priorities that we should focus on. So it wasn't going to come from me. I don't have that information. It wasn't going to come from the council. It was going to come from the people that live here in terms of that's a part of the community driven. But there was a huge amount of data gathered in terms of it then had to be pulled together, then had to be paced out in terms of what did that mean, what categories would that fit under, and move that forward, and then move that into a RFP in terms of move forward. And I want to give you a timeline as I talked about the baseline, the research. So the legislation is done in December 2017. We go to the Board of Estimates in January. We don't even have a contract with the first 2 external organizations that will do that baseline work that will be responsible for RFP till March. And so, but we know we got to get moving because there's a deadline in that says we got to get the money out the door, deadline in terms of priorities. So all of that's going on at the same time in terms of that. But I want to give, there were 3 core priorities that came up out of that data from the community. And that's what was used and built into the RFP. And that was, in fact, we would have strengthening the village, fostering authentic youth leadership, and building sustainable bridges to educational and economic advancement. And you've heard about some of those bridges that are being built right now. Technical assistance, I said from the beginning, was and is a core value for the innovation. So prior to the release of an RFP, had a huge effort to bring technical assistance to those who were applying. So they had an opportunity to partner, to talk, to think, get additional help in terms of moving it forward. The actual RFP design included equity as a factor that would be considered along with the traditional high-scoring proposals. This was intentional. I don't know, and we've done the in terms of where the equity has been built inside of an RFP as an actual piece that the community could actually look at and use a frame, and not just the high-scoring numbers. And so the community reviewers could use that data and the demographics to make decisions about selecting grantees, not just high scoring, but using the equity factors. Again, the RFP process designed by the task force, I said, had to be conducted outside of ABC. And it was, in terms of, so that's an expense that was not a luxury, it was a mandate in terms of moving that. They used online portal in terms of a tool that was called Submittable. Turns out it wasn't the best tool in terms of that, and it's not a tool that's been able to be sustained over time. And who made the decisions about who would get selected in terms of that? Again, the community made that decision about who would get selected. And part of who that community was, there were 30 community reviewers that actually received a stipend. They were chosen out of 120 persons who applied. So it wasn't just a given to anyone. Again, they had to submit applications, their interest of wanting to do this. Again, this is managed by the two firms that are managing this process. The facilitators that were part of the RFP process were trained every step along the way. This is a very intentional design, a very thorough design, in terms of guidelines written to move this forward in terms of that. And when those decisions were made, they weren't altered by ABC. We accepted decisions. The community reviewers could actually make decisions around the dollar amount that may have been in the application, and they came back to say, we think this dollar amount should be there versus that dollar amount. That's never happened before. This city, you made that happen. The community made those decisions. But however, there's a conflict. I've said that already, and I'll repeat it many times again. There's a conflict using city dollars for innovation. The principles outlined in the design, the issue of accountability is huge. And I'm clear that we probably went to the max with accountability rules, we being ABC, after the city audit in terms of that. Now, the auditor, and thank you, Josh, in terms of, didn't find anything financially wrong in terms of that, nor does any of our audits. They have all been great audits in terms of our own external audit firm. But it means for us, because we manage federal dollars as well, we know that we have to ensure clear accounting principles in terms of that are used for managing and for accountability. And although there were program process issues raised, which I'll talk about later. The other conflict for innovation, as much as I know this council and this council's leadership believes in this fund, supports this effort, and that I also know government, having a few years been in government, that I also know that government doesn't have any tolerance for mistakes. And you can't do a big, huge fund and huge innovation and not have mistakes. You can't birth in terms of you cannot build a brand new without having some things, because you don't know what you don't know as it moves forward. But government doesn't have tolerance for that. The innovation means that there will be mistakes and you don't know that. You can conduct as much research as possible at the beginning, pay attention to the data, information along the way. But because you also had limited resources along the way, if something comes up along, and it did throughout this process, there's a set dollar amount that says, I've got to figure out how to manage this issue, and I've got no more resources to do it because they're obligated for X, Y, and Z, but I've got to solve the problem because I've also got to manage political expectation, and I've got to manage the expectation, political expectation of having all this done now. That's the framework in which we've had to move this forward. Innovation requires a new structure, new tools, designs based on research, resources to match the outcomes expected. Innovation design means you have to create new grant making, especially for grassroots organizations and leadership. This leadership and the organizations are rich. You, each and every one of you know, Baltimore is rich. We are so rich in talent in our communities. We're rich in terms of commitment to our youth in this city. People really are doing things without money and wanting to make a difference. And so but that richness and that creativity in terms of as you move forward to bring accountability, bring information, capacity build, move that forward, that is not learning, as I often say to people, it's a process. It's not an event. And so it doesn't happen overnight. In terms of ultimately, though, government expectation requires us to produce an audible trail, which requires a level of detail and documentation. My board of directors requires I have an audible system. And the laws of the state require I have an audible system in terms of being a nonprofit. And again, I shared with you from the beginning what my core work is in terms of that requires that I have a system. But in an effort to address these inherent conflicts, we attempted to ensure that accountability and protection was built in through the grant agreement by building in certain expectations. We used our lawyer to help design the grant agreement that the grantee signed, and we put in elements for protection like insurance. Insurances that had to be in place because I'm a separate entity than government. And so in your MOU with us, you place a burden on ABC that we will have to be accountable for every grantee that's out there, even though I don't know them. That's in my legal document. There's no way my board of directors would allow that to occur without putting in place the protection of insurances that the grantees then had to have in place. And those protections were professional liability, errors and omission, commercial general liability, workers' compensation, blanket crime, abuse, and molestation insurance. That was a requirement. And that took a lot of time. I will tell you, if we had had the energy and time, what I would love to find out the data is more about the insurance industry in terms of, for many of the grantees that could not get insurance, and from the insurance industry who would look at a website of a particular grantee and simply turn them down. Or finding an insurance broker who we ended up finding off of the city's WBE, MBE list that actually served to be the broker that really helped most of the grantees, the challenge. We had one grantee that we actually had to end. And the difference for this innovation, and I will tell you, my board chair fussed constantly with us in terms of, we should say most programming, there's a deadline. You get it done by this date. And the auditors told us we should get it done by this date. And if it's not done by this date, we should move on. We chose not to do this. So one grantee we worked with for almost 7 months into the grant year trying to get the insurance. And we were never able to successfully get the insurance because of what that grantee was doing, no insurance broker. That grantee has now come back for the continuation, has found insurance. As an example of, I talk about the innovation and what's there. Financial responsibility is built into the grant agreement, including the requirements, which we got from the city, in terms of requirements of repayment of city dollars. If the grantee underspends and has half the cash, and as we look at their finances, and that's not spent, they don't get to keep that. That actually has to come back to city government in terms of that. And so we've got to show that accountability. We are very appreciative for the city finance director has given us the ability, given the fact that we now know that we have continuation grants, we now can move that into the grantee's second year, but it gets minus from the total grant. So the total grant can be no more than the first year. I know that's a problem for many grantees in terms of issue, but that was what we were given from the city, and we're clear about accountability and following the rules. The grant agreement articulation of expectation around governance as it relates to state, federal, local laws. And, you know, we had hoped that when this all began, and I want to talk about the people, as Davon talked about, that were really the talent behind moving this forward, that we also thought that having fiscal sponsors would help provide that backstop for grantees, the support if they didn't have the infrastructure. It turned out that a fiscal sponsor system in the city doesn't have the necessary infrastructure in many cases to actually do that. It's not their fault. Nobody's investing in infrastructure for them to have the tools that they need to have, or the staff. I think there's a sense of the nonprofit sector, something about nonprofit, they should be able to do it for free or do it on a dime when it may cost a business about $20,000. But nonprofit sector, the expectation, we'll do it on a dime. It's unrealistic, but that's a conversation for another day. Innovation in terms of balancing the misaligned systems. It was built into the innovation to have technical assistance, deep technical assistance, individual, group technical assistance to help, but also then to make sure that that was a part of knowing what the grantees needed as they grew, as the efforts moved forward. The innovation also said that we should be responsive, I talked about this, to new information. But we also constantly ran up against the issue of insufficient resources to provide basic internal infrastructure and flexibility. ABC, we do very small grants in that, but we really are much more of an intermediary in terms of moving that agenda I just described you out. When the grantees were identified by those community reviewers, 84 grantees. There's probably 2 foundations I can think of in the city would be Annie Casey, probably the other large one in terms of community foundation that would have that many grantees at any one time. That's not an infrastructure that exists at ABC in terms of 84 grantees. But we were clear that we had to make sure that that moved forward. That making sure that that system was in place in terms of the submittal I described that to you, making sure we had a staff accountant that served as that responsibility inside of ABC. Innovation with an equity lens was also a challenge. I think I want to stop here about this innovation in terms of the challenge of equity lens for government, in terms of very appreciative in the auditor in terms of all their support in this. But your government, and I really want to applaud the city council president, your government very much wants to move towards an equity framework, just as you did in terms of this fund. But I would tell you, you are far away from there. You are not there yet. And that plays out when we've got to interact with your government with an innovation that says equity is important, but the rest of your government says, I don't know what equity is, and I don't care about it. In terms of, and it's not that they don't care, they don't know. So equity and fairness and impartiality in terms of, that's something that often doesn't get laid out. And so it really became a challenge in terms of where there's a lack of equity when government uses words to describe grantees selected with an equity framework as grantees who are a deviation from the standard selection process. They're not a deviation, it was an equity framework. Or when government expectation for site visits are related to making sure that you're doing something right, making sure they're really operating in fact, an implied expectation that the site visits should be unannounced and frequent. In the world of philanthropy, that's not how site visits happen. That's not how they happen. And the MOU was one site visit, but it's also a partnership in terms, it's a program partnership in terms of site visits. Yes, you want me to hurry up?
No, apologize. So are you quoting from the audit? When
yes.
Okay.
And it's not a negative, it's just, and again, it's around when you have an equity framework, which I know you're moving towards, everyone's trained in equity. When you get there, you then look at those things differently around what that is in terms of what your expectations are become different in terms of with an equity lens, that's all, in terms of them saying, and so that will change over time. Because each of these organizations that are in fact the nonprofits, they have a board of directors. In the philanthropic world, that's seen as a part of what they're looking for. They're looking at your board of directors, they're looking at your audits, your past audits, they're looking at that in terms of making grants to you. The other thing that's different for this fund versus government's normal action is most of government, when you all do grants, you do it on a reimbursement. This was putting the money up front, and that was uncomfortable in terms of government. But you talked about the very point that you had community-based organizations, community-based groups, that you wanted to make sure they benefited, and they didn't have a dime. But if I did reimbursement, they still wouldn't have a dime, because there's nothing they can do without it. So those are some of the tensions that are built in when you talk about that. Or the sense of government programs should only be used, government dollars should only be used for programs. An expectation in people's head that program means it's a full-time staff person. It's not somebody who's a student in school who happens to be working and doing something a couple hours after. But that was the innovation of the communities that they wanted. In terms, it didn't have to be built like we want it built. It should be built like the community wants it built. But that's the struggle in terms of the innovation. But going forward, talking about how to address some of those challenges to make a difference. We've learned a lot. We still have a lot more to learn, but I will say the challenges for the continuation process in terms of financial technicals we're going forward, we're actually using an accounting firm that we are contracting with to provide an accountant per 20 grantees and an accountant for the fiscal sponsors to help them look at their system, but to work with the grantees in terms of their systems and how that. Councilman Cohen and I have had this conversation, and so I'll say into that, the issue is, do we forego? I know it was onerous for a number of the grantees, the kind of data they had to gather, and the basic financial data, let me share with you, that we're looking for is really sometimes pretty simplistic, but challenging for a small organization. I know that. And some of that basic financial data is a receipt from your spending. Or a signature if you gave a stipend in terms of cash stipend. Some of it's very basic. Some of the challenges were even the math being wrong. That wasn't true for the larger organizations, but some, even the mid-level organizations, mid-level in terms of that, there were challenges because we haven't invested. This is not about anybody trying to do anything wrong. If you haven't invested, if people don't know what they don't know, nobody's giving them that support. And this is even more true in this city and in this country for African American-led organizations, including an ABC. Be clear about that. This is what you're uncovering in this city in terms of what's not there and what's not been invested in thus far. And so that's important to understand that. Going forward, technical assistance will be mandatory for all the grantees. They'll have the ability to opt out only if they can demonstrate they have the skills or the infrastructure in place. We're doing a face-to-face signing of our grant agreements and walk them through each page, each requirement to answer questions up front. There's some instances I think people were so excited about getting the grants and they signed the grant, they got their insurance, even though it took a long time. We had to have navigators to help them do that. And then they signed the agreement. Some cases, as we went back, and the team will share that with you, it's clear they didn't read the agreement. And so we don't want that to happen. Everything should be about capacity building, even this interaction. So we're doing face-to-face. And so we had our first grantee for the continuation grants come in 2 days ago and sign. He had to leave, sign his grant agreement. We had a Zoom call yesterday for grantee, and because it has to be with who has authority to sign the document. Because it can't be for a large organization, you relegate it down to someone lower. Like Sarbanes-Oxley, I want the CEO to know what the requirements are in terms of that, particularly the larger organizations or even the fiscal sponsors. Financial reports this go round will be submitted every month. We had them submitted every quarter. They'll be submitted every month this go round, and the accountant will be working with the grantees. And we'll begin to go deeper in terms of with the TAs working directly with the grantees. I would say the challenge that you'll hear next in terms of that, as Davon shared, in terms of setting up the new organization. So this entire process, including moving the program forward, making sure it's got the research, making sure it's got the foundation, making sure the dollars get out the door, making sure accountability, all that was happening at the same time, and also stand up a new entity, get this in place. All that expectation was built and said, do this and do it on this dime and do it right away. And that's a challenge when you talk about what you want to accomplish. And so you'll hear about that in terms of we're thankful for the finance director and for the administration to heard our voice about helping us separate grant to get that entity, the permanent entity, fiscal entity set up, and that will happen shortly in terms of helping them move that forward, but you'll hear from them directly. But in closing, I want you just to indulge me in terms of, because I need to acknowledge something that is not in this room and that you need to know. And that indulge in terms of to acknowledge not just the grantees that are not here. You'll hear from a number of them that are here, but the community and the thousands of volunteers that put hours into this effort. And even the consultants that are here and not here. These are people that have a commitment to this agenda, that they may have been consultants, and the amount of hours that they put in is enormously beyond what they were paid. Because we were all trying to do the same thing, do all those tasks at the same time. And as crazy as this sounds in terms of all this, as the CEO of ABC, 50% of my time, I'm the operating person for the youth fund inside of ABC. That's crazy. But I want to tell you that's about a commitment to move this agenda forward in this innovation. My board's not happy, but it's about a commitment in terms of that. But I want to end in terms of, because people are working with a passion, and it's not just about a paycheck. But I got to give us a very special thank you and shout out to two persons, but particularly one person who's not here, and that's Danielle Torrain. Danielle, who is now thank you. Danielle, who's now the executive director for OSI, Open Society, but in so many ways, Danielle was the lead designer for this effort. And so I want to thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to Ms. Kara Ritter and hear from her. Is that
No,
still?
you won't hear from
No?
Kara. Kara
Okay.
is so the other name I should give you is Kara Ritter. Kara Ritter is a project manager consultant for ABC.
Got it.
And so she would be adding information from that. That's her role. And I can show you, in terms of QA, if you want to wait, the organizational chart of how this has had to change over time to get the work done.
Okay. And
Okay.
I'm going to take questions from the committee. Again, Dan, I want to thank you. This has been a mammoth task to take this on, and we all understand that. And so I appreciate the incredible amount of energy and effort it has taken to get it here. I'm going to start with Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. McCoy, to you and your team. Again, I'd second. I know this is not an easy task. Most of my questions are pretty much technical in nature, so I don't know if it was a part of, if you had another presentation or that kind of thing. But
If I can't answer, I'll be sure to tell you I can't answer.
Okay. So in response to, we're here after a letter went out by my colleague, Councilman Cohen, questioning where things were with the process after it was reported that over 20 million had not been moved out. So I just want to get a better lay of the land, or portions of the money. If that's incorrect, let me know. But it was reported that a significant amount of money was not being moved out of the fund, and I think you've done a great job at sort of helping us understand why. Is that better, Mr. Gerard? Okay. In response to Councilman Cohen's letter, it was stated that year 2 funds will be available January 21st, 2020. Are those funds available? If not, when will they be?
No, the process for the continuation, and so let me share with you a little bit of background about that. When, I believe it was September, maybe before that, we actually asked our board and where we saw where it was going, the grantees had not spent down all their money, and the grant agreements were supposed to end in September of 2019. We actually asked the city, both the mayor's office and the city council president's office, about the need to do no-cost extensions and continuation grants. Because what we were clear is with all the interruptions in the first year, it wasn't fair to grantees. The audit, which was a huge interruption, the malware, all of that just caused lots of angst for the grantees and lots of fear in terms of all that. So we decided to do the continuation grants, but it meant you couldn't do that until they'll program reports were complete and until the fiscal reports were signed off on. And so that was the decision. But the no-cost extensions ended, I believe, their final reports were due in October. And so as we moved forward, we had a number of grantees at that time. There were 2 issues going on. One, we knew ABC was going to go out of business in this role as of June 2020. We thought we'd be able to stand up the entity, the permanent entity, sooner. We were not, in terms of what lots of challenges and not having the resources. We couldn't sign the agreements for the software that we couldn't sign. They couldn't find lease. All those were the authorizing legislation, and so that caused a challenge in terms of delay. And so before moving forward the continuation grants, we wanted to be clear also that the city understood the challenges we were up against. And so we asked for the meeting with the city, and they graciously gave it, but it was not till January in terms of that. And so where the grantees thought they would get knowledge of that the 1st of December, we notified them the end of December that we had to go back to city government with some clarification. I certainly did not want to put our organization or the grantees in a position to start a process of a continuation and have to stop it. And so your answer to your question of the continuation grant process is begun. In terms of the grantees that have completed and had signed off on their program reviews and their financial reviews, they've actually gotten their application for their continuation grants. They have 10 days to complete it. They're working with a technical assistance advisor that's assigned to them to help them. They'd already begun working with that technical assistance advisor September of last year to review where they were, to help think through. Again, this isn't about just grants. This is about strategically helping them think through what happened last year. Was it too much money? What were the challenges? What do you want to do different this year? There's a TA that specializes around metrics. This is helping people understand you've got a great idea, passion, but how do you measure that? How do we move? So all that happened and all that continue to happen. And so we have the grantees, as I said, I think we have now 29 grantees that have not gotten their application, that they're actually finishing up. It's just 29. That they're finishing up their financial review. And I want to say something about that 29. Most of that financial review that's not complete, 60% of that are grantees that have a fiscal sponsor. 60% have a fiscal sponsor, where that fiscal sponsor has not completed that activity in terms of grants. But the remaining, in terms of those 49 that have actually gotten their applications, we have a number of signings that are already scheduled to sign their grant agreements after their application continuation is approved. And so the first amount of money will come to us for that continuation grants. Finance Director informed me should hit our accounts tomorrow for the continuation grants. The first grantee, as I indicated, signed their documents 2 days ago. Second one was yesterday. And so what we put in the grant agreement, they'll get that money full week after that, as long as the money's in the bank. So it's now moving.
So I take it the opening of year 2 will also be delayed. Is that?
Well, when you say year 2, I've started language around the initial grantee cohort and continuation. I stopped using those terms because that's too confusing in terms of that when you were asking about when will new money, is that your question?
Yes, essentially.
New money will not be, I don't know when it will be available on the street, because what you've got to do is wait for the new entity. In terms of the transition from us to them is between the May and July, and you want to make sure they're in place while we're asking for the grant in advance to help them be in place. Because I will say this, and they can share it for themselves when they come forward. If you put an expectation on them that money has to go out the door the very moment they open their door, you will sink them. You will sink them. So you have to make a decision. The money is important to go out the door, but you got to make a decision about, is the long-term health of the grant, of the youth fund, the importance, so make sure it's sustainable.
And Councilmember, I just wanted to clarify, so there's two different things being discussed. New money is in reference to once the permanent intermediary is established. When we talked about extension grants, that's what I asked for in my letter. That's the re-up that is going to that has started flowing since when did the first round go out of the?
The first set of applications went out for probably that following week. In the letter to you, it went out literally that day in terms of notification to grantees.
So that money has started moving. So just to be clear, so again, there was year one, and then what we've called, what Danville McCoy is calling the extension grants, which is what we had in previous times called year two. The clarifying, differentiating thing is that is not the new intermediary establishing its own process for new grants to go out. That was an extension of year one grants that was promised to the grantees. Does that make sense?
Okay. No, I got it. Council, I guess.
Council,
I had one more.
Burnett,
One more.
Councilman Burnett.
Okay. So, I guess the remaining question I would have is, aside from, and I think my colleague may have some additional technical follow-ups on that piece. I think I got it. Is I guess sort of a general confusion around the. It seems like there's been a lack of support from city government in this process. Is that, so you're saying no, but you know,
no.
it's just okay.
No,
Because really the question I have is like, what additional supports do you need from the council, from the administration, to ensure that things are moving forward from here? Obviously, there's because I think the concern that folks have is that with obviously there are unforeseen circumstances when doing something this big, but the other piece of it is that, you know, one would assume that there would be additional support from finance, and not to put, you know, them on the hot seat, but, you know, we have the apparatus of city government that exists. Trying to understand why it feels like you've been at this on your own, or the organization has been on your own.
No, let me be clear. This government's been very supportive in that sense. That the finance director is great. The mayor is very, that's not the issue here. The issue here is just the nature of government dollars. It's just a conflict in terms of, I think things will be different because I know this government has a commitment to ensure this entire government is trained around an equity framework.
Sure.
That's a big challenge for this government in terms of how you look at the fund. How, if you view it as the standard grant making, if you view it the way your lens show you how government operates right now, then you won't view the innovation in terms of how it is to operate. That's the challenge that I was describing. It's just the nature of government dollars. Councilman Cohen and I had the conversation, and I know that Josh is the auditor around, is there anything we can let go of in the standard accounting practices to make it easier for grantees? In terms of, that would be a question for government. And I know Councilman Cohen will ask that question. But for us, we feel like what we've seen, and including the smaller organizations, that it's more important for us to provide them with support and technical assistance to make it easier to learn what they need to learn to be accountable. We don't think it's okay to say you don't have to do these things. That because we want the grantees, we want this city to be successful in the long haul, sustainable. They can't be sustainable if they don't have the skill set. And I don't think we should try to make them have it all at once, but we ought to figure out if using a fiscal sponsor was how we thought they could get to that. It turns out the fiscal sponsors didn't have the apparatus to do it. So how do we strengthen that?
And I guess really what I'm trying to get at is the concern that I think a lot of folks may have moving into your organization is experienced, established, you've been around. Are there additional supports that may be needed from city government to, I mean, with the creation of yet another new entity that will obviously, we've already heard, will have folks who've been a part of the process. So when I say new, I just mean literally new and it's an establishment, but obviously, is there a need for additional support to ensure that this doesn't extend into another fiscal year and this sort of continuation of funds not moving out into the community, and that being the story out here in the story of this program? And I guess, Davon, you may have more to add.
Yeah, so one of the things I just wanted to add is that one of the conversations that was had during the initial development of the enabling legislation was the admin cap. And one of the things that I mentioned was that 10% is simply not enough in terms of resources to do all the things necessary. If we were just talking about administering the fund, it wouldn't be enough, but it would be less of a burden. But to administer the fund, having to use the processes of public dollars and build a new intermediary, those two things, 10% is just simply not enough. But one of the things that was said to us is that the appetite publicly for a higher admin cap, because when you look around the country, nationally, you're looking at about 20 to 25% in terms of what it actually costs to administer something of this sort. But unfortunately, there are a lot of folks that perceive like an admin fee, again, as like dollars you just get to pocket, as opposed to the dollars that are available to actually have all the key functions necessary to make it move smaller. So it'll be really helpful for this council to be a champion particularly for the new intermediary, that it's going to be the permanent. It's going to be important that they're not hindered by an admin cap that is kind of based on the, quite frankly, political fears of how people will react to the notion of having a high admin cap.
Yes. So I couldn't have said it better. I want to add to that. That really is an issue. In terms of, I show you the slides in terms of the organizational structure, in terms of, because of the cap, how we had to balance, how we had to put much of the work external in terms of consultants, and how it meant that any work that I did internal, any work my accounts payable, who was supposed to be doing work at ABC, who, let's mind you, has only been off Thanksgiving weekend and Christmas because he's worked every single weekend since September working on financial reviews, every single weekend. And he works every evening trying to get it out the door. And just be clear in terms of to make sure the grantees weren't hurt and that all the work that happened out there, although they were doing double time and pointing to the consultant team, that in fact, the bottom line that ABC took from an administrative just to pay the cost of the work we're doing, it didn't pay us. The first year, ABC and my board would make $165,000 went to our bottom line for work that we did that was probably about $300,000. But that's all I could do was 165. Because if I did any more, I'm going to hurt that work that's got to happen out there. Or in terms of last year, it was 198. I can't do any more because it's got to go out there to make sure we have the money to move the apparatus forward, to get the design done.
And last question, we haven't. So you referenced earlier that there was a bill coming. We haven't. Obviously, this body hasn't seen it, and maybe this is a question just for follow-up from the administration. But I guess speaking broadly, is this issue addressed in the legislation being put forth? Is this something that we could expect to be a part of the conversation moving forward?
So there is a draft that we've been working with the administration with. The cap. So the similar concerns still exist in terms of not wanting the cap to be too high. And so what we've discussed is 15%, and then maybe an additional category that would supplement some of the things that may be considered administration. One of the things to note is that a part of the challenge is how certain funds are categorized, right? So if you have an admin cap, but for instance, you want to do more robust public outreach and public communications, right? One could consider that administrative because that's the job that ABC statutorily has been required to do. And so you end up having to make choices between like what work can be considered administrative, work isn't. And so that was just a big part of it. So 15, we've gone up 15%, and then an additional category of 5%. I think we talked about it being public engagement. So having that as kind of a separate carve out that would supplement the admin cap. But I don't presume to speak for the administration. But if the council,
I wasn't asking you to. I was more like looking for a nod from some of the folks I know.
Yeah, but I would
Okay.
posit that if the council would be supportive of making sure the admin cap is sufficient, then I imagine I would suppose that the administration would be good with that. I'm sure that for the intermediary that's going to be built, that would relieve a lot of stress from those that are going to be tasked with absorbing the work that ABC is doing with the 80 or so grantees, and then having to do the work of building out a new RFP to put out new dollars for new grantees.
And they also said today, what will also have to happen in that legislation is you'll have to have the appetite for the crossover, the transition, because although we end in June, from a financial accountability, we really have to let the entity begin, but we have to stay in place so that we can continue to review the financial reports at least through the end of August, where the money spent down of this first half that the grantees will get.
Councilwoman Clark.
Can I just go backwards and start from ground zero from my, okay. All right, first of all, there were 84 people, 84 organizations in round one, round one, that were eligible and did receive grants through the Children and Youth Program, correct?
So that I can be precise, there were 83, as I indicated. One
that one you described. Thank you. So that got done. And then, and here's where I'm somewhat confused, and I think my colleague and you have tried to clarify it, but can I ask the same question again in another way? So I have constituents, they call, they say, what's happening with the second year of the grant? So I'm guessing, and I didn't know this, that if you got a grant the first year, it was really you were assured of having, you were part of a 2-year process, that you were going to go into year 2 with that grant, and I'm not sure that's correct. Is that right?
That's not correct. That is not correct.
Okay, so everybody had to apply all over again from scratch.
Let me clarify. I want to be clear, your assumption is not correct. Later that became true. When we began, we wanted to do 2-year grants because that made sense.
Yeah.
When you started, at the time, the administration didn't have an appetite for that. Okay. So given what happened the first year and the grantees did not have a optimal environment, we then had a joint conversation that it made sense to put continuation grants as an option. But when that notification went out to the grantees from year 1, you could only get a continuation if you were already a grantee. You could only apply for a continuation grant if you were already a grantee.
Right.
Right, okay. But it wasn't automatic. The grantees have been told that there will be a review process because we've got to learn from what happened last year.
Okay.
If there were challenges, that's got to be factored into it. Is to give the grantee an opportunity to improve upon what lessons they learned.
Okay. All right, so year 2, and I know that it's being called something else, extension grants. Continuation grants. Okay, so everybody who got a grant was told you have the option to apply for a continuation grant for the second year theoretically of the same project.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
And so, do you have any idea how many organizations did that?
Yeah, what I was saying to you is that we actually have grantees that we've already given their application. So they're applying now. Right now. This is all happening right now, real time.
So nobody has anything but the first year's money.
Yes,
yet
correct.
Out there.
Correct.
And the first year's money went out in...
The first year money
went out.
In 2018, most of the grantees, a number of them signed the agreement in August Well, they couldn't sign the agreement until the insurances were in place, till the background checks were done. I would tell you that the money, as we talked about this, people thought it was too long, but it was like 64 days it took for that first money to hit the door.
So 64
4
days
days from
after,
August.
What?
From August 2018.
So it was August, September. It was November.
Yeah,
It was
October,
November of
2018. They were selected.
Okay.
And the first contracts were signed October 2018. They were selected in August. I'm sorry, my staff is giving me correct information. They were selected
sorry.
August. No, it's important to give accuracy. They were selected in August, but the actual signed the agreement was October 2018. The first contract signed. The first contract.
year one.
Year one.
Okay, so yeah, it's like it's a couple of months beyond what would be year two now, and so there's something happening, or a combination of things, that is holding up the flow of money. Now, it's certainly understandable that in year one of such a really innovative, new kind of, and very importantly new, kind of organizational structure, it's going to take longer than just a cookie cutter kind of big grant. We always get them, gee whiz, they're 2 days late kind of place. So, okay.
But
So
Madam,
we're picking, right?
let me add you, we will own in terms of part of that, in terms of holding up. We think about those that had no-cost extensions, because you could also, at the end of last year, get a no-cost extension for several months. But as I indicated, one of the requirements, your program review had to be signed off on for your third and fourth quarter for the grantee to do it, and your fiscal, financial. The holdup for many of the grantees, we own this, is getting through the financial reviews. The financial reviews, the challenge of that, again, both the challenge belongs on our side of the table in that it is a very detailed process. I said to you that my person worked every weekend. A financial review, when you print out all the documentation, all the backup material, it can be 300 to 400 pages. Each. And so I have one accounts payable person who's doing that. That's not optimal.
So that brings us back to what Mr. Love was talking about, so diplomatically.
He's very diplomatic.
I know, he always has been, and it's very nice. He says there's not enough money in the intermediary 10% capped budget for the process to move more rapidly through the review, through the review process, because now I have an image of some poor, tired woman sitting under a light bulb in some room trying to get through a whole lot of reviews.
It's a man, but yes.
Their money.
Yes.
And I mean, literally. So then that image, thank you, Mr. Love, for the image. It was very, but that image says the temporary intermediary does not have the resources within the cap to move this stuff out the door.
Right.
And it has to move out of, that's the door it has to move out of, correct?
Correct. But let me be clear. That is correct. Along with that, though, is the other issue of making sure the grantee has the support. So it's not just, we may go back and forth for the grantee, even though I have one accounts payable. My contracts and grants officer, then I put her into it. So she actually then went out. We actually brought another accountant in temporary to help. So we were able, in terms of to use our own resources to try to help move it and to be a translator. Because the challenge of this is translating the information. If you don't know finances, if you don't know, I'm saying I need this information, that in terms of basic accounting, then you don't know it. And so when this first came up, and we spotted it because the way this structure worked, Kara Ritter, who was a project manager for ABC on this, who's a consultant, and Danielle, along with the leadership team, Dave on other, but Danielle, Kara and I would meet weekly in terms of talking about the problems, because they were also then talking to their teams. When we would identify that we were seeing that the mid-level grantees were having problems with their finances, we thought the issue would come from the smaller ones, but a number of it came from the mid-level ones and the fiscal sponsors. We then had meetings, we then brainstormed, how do we solve this? Well, let's bring on a financial TA. Let's bring on somebody that's got the skills that can go out and work with the grantees and help them learn how to do this. And that's what we did. But even that one person wasn't going to be enough in terms of moving that forward.
You got 84, you got 83?
83.
All right, so we have, not to prolong this, because I think, well, and when you're talking about explaining things to people, it's like what you're trying to explain to me right now. I mean, it's hard for me to understand, but then you're telling me, I'm not saying us right now, I'm just talking about things I don't understand, but you're saying words that help explain it, but it's something I'm trying to get my head around. So that's what's going on with with a lot of your grantees. Interestingly enough, fiscal sponsored grantees, that middle group where most of the grants went, are the ones that are having the most trouble, which says a lot.
It says a lot. And it's not I just want to be clear, it's not a sense of they care deeply, but they also don't have the resources.
Right.
Both of the fiscal sponsors require their grantees to give receipts. But literally, I can give you one grantee that I was working with one fiscal sponsor since August, and they have been trying to capture the receipts. They had to go back. They couldn't find the receipts.
So, okay, so we have these problems. We've got to solve them. We have a phenomenal benefit here, which has wisely been slowed down to build capacity all around.
Yes, ma'am.
But we got to make some changes, and we've got to make them and I'm sure the finance department and you all have been talking about this. It's just,
well, we believe having the accountants, the technical assistants as accountants. We have an accounting firm that actually used to work with part of government. We have a firm that actually has 5 accountants we have on contract. Those accountants will actually be on point with the grantees. 5 accountants is a lot different than one. When you talk about 80 grantees.
so I've taken up too much time already of this committee's and of your, just to try to get the ABCs going. So I just can't do that all night, or nobody else gets a chance to talk. So I've said what I think I hear you need. And whatever, we have to figure out a way for the money to get to the programs faster and to get the help we need. By definition, we are serving many, many, many groups that have been so marginalized that they have not had the joyful experience of dealing with this kind of thing, and now they have it in the middle of trying to do the thing they said they wanted to do. And so we need to throw some more of the resources of this program, say it's just for 3 years or something, to get the systems, the intermediary systems in place, and move this money out to the street and to the recipients. Now, it's time for another round of offerings. Really. And that should be, I mean, we got to get the money out the door.
But you want to make sure you have it as accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to get it correctly but we gotta use some of it, and everybody's gotta just understand, nobody's stealing any money here, but that we've gotta get more of that money for a limited period of time into the process of everybody having the resources they need to get the money safely and cleanly and honestly out the door, into the streets, into the programs, and be ready to turn around and do it again, all over again next year. And I think that we should work in that direction, and I just have every reason to think the city is.
I
But
believe
let's
so as
do
well.
it.
I mean, I think that, again, the permanent entity and some of the board members are here, and I know that you'll hear from them in terms of we certainly will continue to be as cooperative. We'll continue to look for solutions, even as we move forward for this remaining 4 months in this role, because it will be very important that they are situated to move.
Well, and if there's a permanent intermediary getting itself together, and that's gonna hold up everything on top of everything.
Well, the goal right now is we ask for the administration work with us in that meeting I described, and we recognize that unless we had dedicated resources, that permanent intermediary could not move forward unless they got resources to set up their infrastructure.
Well,
And the city has agreed to do that.
And the what?
The city has agreed to do that. They will do a special grant to ABC. You will hear from the Fund for Excellence, who will be working with them. And the board is here for that new intermediary. The board is here. They designed what they needed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right.
So
Councilman Burnett.
just to the chair, so we should hold off, because I do have questions about what that actually looks like. Should I hold off until the next?
I would hold for the next panel. Yep. And just so folks know, this hearing is going to go late, so I have ordered some pizzas so that we can have dinner. Ms. Bell McCoy, a couple of things I want to ask. So both you and Davon had mentioned just the challenge around the capacity gap in this town. For folks who are not familiar with verbiage of nonprofits, could you sort of explain what you mean by that?
What I simply mean is having the infrastructure, the tools, the knowledge to do your job. In terms of you can do the program work. As I said, we know there's talent in this town, commitment to our youth. That is not a question. But when you talk about spending dollars and being able to go after other dollars, then just as any business, there's a business of being that organization. And so if you are hiring people, you got to have an HR infrastructure, you got to have HR policies. Let's start with you got to have a strong board. ABC does a board training for African American leaders in this town because there wasn't an onboarding for them. You got to have a board that know all the things that you need in terms of the governance. All of those laws that govern nonprofits, you've got to know them. Somebody's got to be responsible for that. The infrastructure in terms of having an accounting system, having software, having the technology that would make the work even happen faster versus trying to do it on paper and pen. Those are gaps in this town. And just simply having those components, having the ability to actually know how to network, to do strategic planning in terms of that will take you from this point to that point. That's a talent, that's a skill, that's something you learn in terms of that. To actually know how to do metrics, how do you measure your work? It's not just the number, you're trying to take people from this level to that level. What are that metric? How do you measure metric? What's the software to record metric? That is not in place in many in the nonprofit sector, particularly of color.
And so, you sort of alluded to this tension that I think we feel around the urgency that our young people need to, we need these programs, we need them to be fully funded, we need them to not be worrying about having to lay someone off and make payroll, that our young people are really relying on them. And then, what you sort of mentioned, which is the challenge of dealing with a rigid governmental structure that is not versed yet fully in equity, in sort of how to innovate outside of the box. And so what I wonder if you could speak a little bit to sort of that specific challenge. And, we talked earlier about what for you, aside from additional resources as we then stand up the permanent intermediary, what for you, in looking at the audit and looking at some of the challenges that you faced, would make it easier to get the money out the door, to support the organizations, to continue to build capacity, because as you correctly told us again and again, that's critically important to the mission of this work, is that we're not just trying to throw dollars at nonprofits, we're really trying to build up their capacity, their ability to do across the city. So as we look at the audit, as we look at some of the challenges that it then created in terms of being able to quickly move dollars, and I'm going to speak to the auditor in a minute, but what would moving forward make that process a little easier from the auditing perspective?
So I want to be clear and precise. The auditing perspective did not hurt in terms of from a financial accountability perspective, because this audit did not draw down on anything financial. The audit was reviewing processes. So when I talk about the absence of equity, it was around processes. The point I would make about the financials to get the money out the door, I would say, Councilman Cohen, it is important for this leadership to be clear and supportive of our grantees by helping them understand they need to learn the tools to get the job done. Because it is crippling. What I describe in terms of what we're looking at as standard accounting practices has nothing to do with city audit. My auditor expects certain accounting practices to be in place. We manage Ryan White. The federal government expects certain auditing practices to be in place. Some of that basic stuff is receipts, documentation. And so I don't want to create an expectation in my mind for particularly communities of color that is not okay that you can't be excellent, because they can. And so, but it means us putting more support in place, not just, I think financial is one of them, but how we do that. The accountants will do training. They will put more hands on it. We'll help the grantees learn some of the language. We'll help systems they can put in place. That, for me, is real equity, because it means they will be able to be sustainable and they will be able to be excellent in that field. Doing something less than that, for me, is not about helping them achieve long-term sustainability, because I can tell you now, not putting those things in place, not another foundation in this town will touch them. And they will be relying upon government forever. And that's not what we want to happen.
Yep, Councilwoman Clark.
No, I just want to say this. It's kind of based on what you're saying. What about if things picked up in some way like this? You've got 83 organizations that got grants. Some of them, or a bunch of them, are going to get grants again pretty soon now. Okay, but nobody knew. So what if the next round was a 2-year thing, and that for those who need it, for whom this is a first-time experience getting anything, the first year is building their own infrastructure.
Yes.
There's money
Yes.
to do it.
Yes.
To do that.
Yes.
Not to do
the program.
The daycare
Yes.
for kids that,
Yes.
that what they know how to do.
Yes.
But to take the first year to learn how to be,
Yes.
to get money.
Yes.
And then knowing that in the second year, they're going to use that experience, because meanwhile, they are taking care of the kids, but meanwhile, big deal funding to get them ready to get money, and then they move into year 2, which is their first year doing what they do.
Yes.
but they have now a year of background. So it's a 2-year grant. Or, you know what? It's a 3-year grant. So they got 2 years after that with the kids. But part of it is learning how to get something.
Yes.
And how, what the rules of the game are. But meanwhile, you've got, all right, so how about something like that?
Councilwoman Clark, that is actually a recommendation from a number of the team in terms of that was
Really?
actually,
They didn't-
yes. With Danielle, and I think it was Kara talk, we really should be doing capacity building grants and not do program grants initially for everybody. What you just described was build the capacity first, if that. But this effort was in fact to help create a model that not just for the person slated to get money, but so that we could build more capacity for more nonprofits that don't get this money even. That we should be doing exactly that so that there are a lot more people who could benefit and go elsewhere. But nobody's doing that.
Well, let's do it.
Yes, let's do
So
it.
basically, and we can do it for, I mean, we've got to move on this.
Yes.
We can't stand still. We have need. And if that need, which of course is a need for how to get money.
Yes.
And what to do with it when you get it so you can make, period.
Yes.
Then give them a grant. Okay, we love your program with the kids. So we'll give you a 3-year grant, and the first year is you got to take care of those kids, but we're giving the money for you to learn how to get the money, and in the next 2 years, you're going to get it.
So as I say, yes, I think that makes sense. I want to be cautious to say, but I'm not going to be in the role of making that decision.
And
so,
well, I know, but I'm saying it out loud because I'm about to retire in a year, and they can't do anything to me for saying it. But I still think
I think you got to.
Then you build
right
a whole bunch of organizations that actually they can go other places too to apply.
Can I share with you one thing that this is not, because I want to put it in a framework. This is not just related to the youth fund. So, because as I talked, you asked me about the nonprofit sector. So as I shared with you, we manage a Ryan White fund. And in terms of a number of the vendors, we literally have part of our agreement in the Ryan White is to do TA in that. Because what we found is there are vendors in that space that, again, that's federal dollars. But that from an accounting standpoint, we run up where they don't have all the tools necessary, and we have to get close to to stopping the contract. Working with the health department, we've tried to put more things. We just were successful with one vendor, African American, to get her the tools to actually get in place in terms of audit and getting it done on time and her systems, and we're still working for her. So this is my point of this. This is true in this city. I don't want us to just highlight the youth fund. The youth fund just became the spotlight to uncover what Davon talked about is in this city, period. We didn't build this. We built exactly what we got. No capacity. That's what we built. We had that, and the largely foundations focus on largely those groups that already can do it and be successful, and that's not us.
Right, let's be successful. Let's go get them.
Thank you, Ms. Bell McCoy.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, we are now going to hear from Julia Baez, Erica Davies, Dorcas Gilmore, and Roger Schulman. And if you all could just come up and let's do this in a panel, and then we will ask questions. So if you want to just come on up together. Yep. And the mics should be good. So if you want to do, yep, right there. Perfect. All right. If you could introduce yourself, use the mic, starting with Julia Baez.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Julia Baez.
Julia.
Sorry. Julia Baez, interim board member with the Children and Youth Fund.
Dorcas Gilmore, legal counsel to the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund.
And I'm Roger Schulman, the president of the Fund for Educational Excellence.
Great. Want to start with you?
Sure. Well, you're going to kick it off.
Yes, I am.
I'll turn over to Dorcas.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So good evening once again. Thank you to the chairman and the committee, to all the young people who are here this evening, as well as all the supportive adults. This part of the hearing is devoted to what is happening with the permanent intermediary, and what we want to highlight are how the institution is being built with the core values of race equity, intergenerational leadership, community ownership, and collective decision-making. And that key to doing that as a permanent institution is to learn from everything that we just heard this evening, and to make sure that as we are building, we are taking into consideration all of the things that have happened with grantees, all of the things that have happened in terms of the relationship with city government, as well as building the kind of community infrastructure that's necessary in order for this to be successful. So how are we doing that? For the interim board has met twice to date and has developed a transition committee that was launched in December to oversee and manage the shift from Associated Black Charities to the permanent intermediary. That transition committee has 3 main functions. The first is to understand to understand the current status of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, to understand in depth and operationally what you have heard already in terms of continuation grants, infrastructure that exists, staffing, and the posture of legislation that's necessary in order for this to actually make sense. The second bucket is to prepare to take over on July the 1st. So as you also heard from Diane, Associated Black Charities term will end June the 30th. So that means that the permanent intermediary needs to be ready on July 1 to move forward and to not have any kind of gaps. That will require understanding the legislative and legal requirements that are necessary to be an independent intermediary, and to have the infrastructure in place to administer the continuation grants and to eventually have new money. So this is the distinction between year 2 and year 3, new money that is going into communities. The third bucket is really around preparing for long-term operations, and so I'll turn that over to Julia.
Thank you. So the transition committee, which Erica Davies unfortunately has the flu, so she wasn't able to make it tonight, but there are some other interim board members that are here with us if they want to stand up and be recognized or just wave. And so in terms of preparing for sort of the 2 tracks, preparing for July 1 to receive the work that's currently in place, we will be honoring the continuation grants that ABC is now putting out. And so that second sort of phase of funding that those grantees will have committed to them through this process, we will be making that second payment. So in terms of sort of support from the city, we're going to want to make sure that as the legislation moves through, we can expedite the process to sign the MOU with the legal entity to make sure we can draw down funding to be ready for July 1 to provide those resources to grantees. We're also relaunching, as Davon mentioned earlier, the community engagement process, the assessment process. We will be recruiting new and permanent board members with an emphasis on young people, really looking at that intergenerational leadership that was part of the initial charge of the Youth Fund. We're also going to begin hiring staff. So we heard that the approval of this interim funding will be coming down in the next week or so. That will allow us to bring on consultants to begin sort of shadowing the work that ABC is doing now in terms of moving the continuation grants forward, as well as the engagement process. And we'll be working with the Fund for Educational Excellence as the backbone for that administrative work in the interim to make sure that we're set up and we're ready to go very quickly to meet the needs of grantees. And I'll let Roger talk a little bit about what that role will look like in support of the interim board.
Sure. Thanks, Julia. So the Fund for Educational Excellence will serve or we're in discussions for the Fund for Educational Excellence serving in two different capacities. As was talked about earlier, in the original ordinance, Associated Black Charities has responsibility for standing up the interim intermediary, and Diane Bell McCoy and the Fund for Educational Excellence have been in conversations about a subcontract agreement to take us through June 30th of this year to help serve between Associated Black Charities and the Youth Fund transition team to be able to do everything that needs to happen to stand this permanent intermediary up. And that entails a lot of what Julia just talked about, but it's everything from making sure they have all of the insurances they need, to having a payroll process, to having space and technology to be able to fully, on July 1st, be able to be a fully operational organization that is allowed to receive money from the city, so that the grantees experience no interruption once ABC's contract under the ordinance expires. And then, as Julia mentioned, we have had some conversations with the interim board of the Children and Youth Fund for the Fund for Educational Excellence to serve, again, in a subcontractor role to manage finance, administrative, and HR processes for the Youth Fund. Very back-end services at their direction. So those are the ways in which the Fund for Educational Excellence may be involved in this work.
Okay. Questions from committee? Councilwoman Clark.
There is an option. I'm coming from not being part of this organizational structure at all, or any, so we got problems right now, and now there is going to be, are we creating an organization here that is to become a recipient of funding? And are we incorporating it and getting its 501c3? I'm not talking about the Fund for Educational Excellence. I'm talking about what has been called the permanent intermediary. I cannot wait till it gets a real name so I don't have to keep spelling that intermediary word on my notes. Is it a little premature, or is there an urgent matter here? Because it sounds as if we could use a year to catch up with our constituents and make sure they're, and you know, all that was talked about. I mean, is there a rush here to do this now?
I think there's two pieces of urgency around this. One is, as you heard from Diane, the current legislation ends on June 30. So on July 1, an entity has to be in place to be able to draw down the funding from the city to be able to distribute that to grantees, because ABC will no longer be in that position. The other thing is that what we're committing to in terms of the new entity is to honor the continuation funds. We want to give time to community to come back to the table to think about the next RFP that goes out for new funding. So we're trying to manage both, giving space for the engagement and for the community conversations, and meet the urgent need of being ready on July 1 to honor the grantees and the continuation funding that's being put out right now.
Let me just say this. you got all these, you have all these organizations out there that are now getting continuation money. After all this time and all this bureaucracy, now we have a chance to go forward. And yeah, the ordinance says, I mean, some ordinance is going to have to be in place, and it could be one that extends Associated Black Charities if they were willing to just get us through, while they're not going to do it, right? I mean, I don't know. So they won't do it because they know what they know. They're an organization that exists and that has the experience now of what needs to happen to get this thing on going, while you all figure out how to fill out a 501c3 request. I mean, I know how hard it is.
Councilman,
it's not going to be ready by July 1 that you're going to have a 501c3 ready to accept money, I bet.
Okay.
so they already are an existing organization.
Exactly.
What is it?
Incorporated last fall.
Right.
Yeah, that was a part of the work we did. That was what I was describing. That was still, we had already done that.
The Baltimore Children and Youth Fund,
The
Inc.
what?
The Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, Inc.
Okay, so that's what is going to seek nonprofit status.
To seek 501c3 status.
That's not done yet.
Correct. The status is not
But you've
granted
got a
yet.
corporation.
Correct.
And does it have a board?
Yes.
Yes.
That's who we are. We're the interim board, and there's other members here in the audience.
Wait a minute. Who's the interim board?
Well, I'm representing one member of the interim board, but there's a list of members of the board that were part of the incorporation of the organization. Some of them are here today.
So if I can just try to clarify, one of the things that's really difficult about this process is that ABC was never intended to be the permanent intermediary. So a part of what we're dealing with is the incredible burden that we just talked about, the administrative burden in managing the youth fund, and then having to do the work of transitioning from the work of the youth fund at the same time as building an organization. And so some of that work in building the new intermediary has been done. And so a part of what's happening is that there's an interim board that's going to have the responsibility, with the assistance of the Fund for Educational Excellence, to absorb the work of the first year of the first cohort of grantees, in addition to building out the permanent organization, which by statute is required. So the statute requires, it's not an option. It's not something
Well,
that.
I read the ordinance charter and everything else, and it keeps saying you can extend it for a year, extend for a year in the temp, basically it's all just laws that terminate and you can extend for a year. So there's no legal reason not to get into, but it's always said that, and it keeps extending, I believe. So basically, so somehow, so Associated Black Charities will not, somehow isn't going to be able to extend itself as the temporary intermediary. Is that what I'm hearing? And so somehow somebody has to do it, and there's a corporation that has a board that is going to get itself in the place to be the permanent.
So, Councilman, yes, that's correct, but let me be clear about something. The work that's happened thus far was work that we did. This isn't new stuff. We were already moving down this pathway. Okay, this isn't just didn't just pop up. And so we literally had a plan, including getting the insurance, getting the software. That's when we ran into the challenge. We didn't have enough resources, time, manpower to get that in place. And we didn't have legal authority since they weren't recognized yet in terms of authorizing legislation. As it relates to ABC in terms of extending its time, just that we'll be very supportive of the new entity and making sure they get the support to move forward. We designed the grant agreements as a way to transfer. We want to make sure that we're capturing our data as a way it can be easily transferred to the new entity. I had this conversation with my board chair in terms of be clear, there's no comment I can make about this because there's a board of directors I report to that would have to vote on that. But I would also add, Madam Councilwoman, that we also got a directive from our auditor last year that we need to be very focused on our own core agenda and come out of the business of doing the helping in terms of that because we're losing time of our own agenda.
Well, okay, I surrender. You're going to do it. I presume I would like for this committee to have, and they may already have, who this board is, and what who the people that are named that are in this corporate board that's going for its 501c3, and the mix of youth in that board and their background, everybody's backgrounds, and by the way, stop everything else you're doing for the next couple months, because that's all you will be able to do in order to be ready for July 1 and be able to move this. I mean, that in itself would be the miracle of the ages, but I guess you're going to have to perform it.
Yes.
Okay.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Additional clarifying questions here. Okay. So start date for Baltimore City Youth Fund, Inc., July 1. I'm a little bit confused, though, because it seems like there's a few things happening. It was mentioned that ABC is assisting with the transition. Then it was also mentioned that there are a set of consultants.
Let me just add, the way this works in terms of much of the work that falls under us is done by consultants. So that's how, you have in your packet the organizational chart, how this is done. And so in doing that work, what we got clear over the last, from September through December, trying to do that work inside of ABC, even with that, we literally were having the same consultants trying to do both bodies of work. That was impossible. We literally had the same people trying to do both bodies of work. That's when we went to the city and said, look, this isn't working, although we're tasked with doing that. We can't do it that way without making sure we have the resources to select a set of consultants dedicated, Councilman, to those tasks to get it up and running. That's all that we need to do.
Okay. And so they're an extension of your role in transition. What I'm also trying to understand is then where does, or further clarification on the role of the Fund for Educational Excellence in this transition. It feels duplicative to me.
So what we determined is that what Davon described you earlier, ABC, in terms of both being the fiscal agent but also responsible for the programming, if I've got to also oversee all the tasks with those consultants to set up the new organization, I've got to see all the tasks for the continuation grants, for the technical assistance. I've got to see all of those tasks just sitting inside of my organization. The fidelity to pay attention to the transition in the setup of the new entity can't happen. And so the fund becomes a sub-recipient. I do a contract agreement with the fund. You oversee all these tasks and report back to me regularly to make sure it happens. If I'm trying to oversee my organization, the fund, the continuation grants, the startup, you won't see me anymore in terms of that, because I'll be somewhere else. But that's almost impossible. For the fidelity, we want to make sure the entity gets all the support it needs to be strong, and instead it needs to have a focus and an organization that's managing the consultants.
So there was do you want to ask the question, Councilman?
Who's the chair of this new corporation?
So we are in the process of finalizing the bylaws, as Davon mentioned earlier. Following that, there will be an election. We do not have officers. It's just a shared model of leadership.
Who's the boss of what you're doing?
We are working together to move this work forward.
ABC was responsible for the formation of the entity.
That's what the law says.
So the board,
ABC is
right,
yes,
until
is
the
boss
transition,
of
right,
this process.
Yes.
correct.
And you will stay with it until it's, right, until July. You will stay with it until it is done, or you will stay with it until July 1?
I will stay with it because it will be done by July 1.
Very clever.
One other thing I want to add is it is our proposal that the board is an interim board. So it is not the board that will permanently be the board of the entity. When you do startups, right, a lot of times you need folks in place that have the requisite combination of expertise to get it off of the ground. We hope that the interim board will take the responsibility of structuring a process that by the end of an 18-month term of them being interim board members, that they'll be able to do the sufficient outreach, the sufficient community engagement, such to populate a board commensurate to the mission of the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund.
Sorry. Okay.
Councilmember Burnett.
All right. Okay. So, sorry to keep doing recaps here because it's a lot. All right. So, ABC via the consultants are helping with the transition. It was mentioned that there's staff being hired. The staff are going to work for the Baltimore City Youth Fund, Inc. When do they start?
So up through June 30, with the fund as the subcontractor to ABC, they will be consultants on contract with the Fund for Educational Excellence. Following July 1 is when folks would transition to being employees under the LLC or future 501c3 if we have it by that point.
In July 1, those staffers are tasked with getting out year 2 money.
So we've had conversations with the existing staff that are working under ABC. Those folks are interested in rolling over, so there'll be a lot of consistency in terms of the support, the staffing, the technical assistance. We are going to be shadowing the process. We've already been in deep conversation with ABC and the fund, and so we are working with them on the continuation grant, and it'll be the second payment of the continuation grant that the new entity will make to those grantees. So the first payment will come through ABC, and then following July 1, they'll receive their second payment from the new entity.
All the consultants that are doing the body of work now in terms of, for example, the technical assistants who are working with the grantees and helping them move forward, as well in terms of some of the specialists that what with the existing consulting agreements with them end, I believe it's in April. We've done that intentionally so that they can then roll over to begin working on that next phase. Because then we will hire another set of temporary folks to go and do the compliance. There's a whole set of doing the site visits, all those compliance checks that we have to do. We'll let that staff with experienced consultants move over to the fund, to BCYF, to begin moving into their new roles.
So has there been a timeline established by this interim board to distribute or to begin taking in applications for year 2 funds?
We have not set a timeline for a new RFP at this point. What we have committed to is relaunching the engagement process even before July 1, so that we're having conversation. To Dorcas's point, we want to do some assessment, we want to engage grantees, we want to bring youth back to the table, and so we imagine that work will help define what will be the new RFPs under the new LLC or new entity.
And so the RFP, so July 1 or sometime after, there's an expectation that that interim board, the now staff of this new entity, will begin the community engagement process. Is there a timeline for starting and ending that process?
We hope to start the engagement process prior to July 1 so that we are moving that work before the entity is even independent. So we're waiting for the funding from the city to initiate the transition work. So once that comes down, we can begin putting folks on contract and getting that work started.
The funding will come. We've already, because we're still liable in terms of given the ordinance, we worked with them to lay out their work plan. We submitted their funding request after we worked with the mayor's office and the finance director. We all met to see what was necessary to move it and what funding, and then we were to submit that, and we did. And the finance director just informed me tonight that that money should be coming to us next week.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so a few things. One, pizza is now available in the other room if folks are hungry for dinner. Yep, we're gonna get to public testimony right after this panel. Last question from me is, so just moment of truth to my colleague's point, it does seem like an incredibly tight timeline. We're now looking at July 1, that's a couple months. We're in late April. So I think there is concern about, are we truly going to be ready to make this transition? Just gut check, where are we on that?
So I'll say one point and then I'll ask Roger to step in. I think if we were doing this on our own and didn't have infrastructure, have a backbone organization that was going to support us, that has already worked with the city to draw down funding, that already has experience in grant making, that is working with these other entities like the Youth Fund, that it would be a harder sort of commitment to make. But I know, Roger, we've talked about this. I don't know if you want to share your perspective on readiness.
So I think it's, to be honest, a fair question. This is a heavy lift in a short period of time, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. I do think there is a very concrete way to approach this that will make it possible for this to be done, but it is a heavy lift, and I think, to Councilwoman Clark's point, I think any of us who are involved in this understand this is going to have to be the bulk of what we do for the next 4 months. We're not going into that naively, just to be clear. So, I think this work can be done, but it is a really heavy lift. And when we look at everything that's going to need to happen, I believe that we'll be able to get everything up and running. I think also making sure that all of the compliance to a lot of the conversation that we've had over the last couple of hours of what needs to be in place in order for the city to say that the new entity is ready to start drawing down funds, that is another place where I anticipate we're going to need a lot of cooperation from the city, because there are many steps in that process as well. And if the new entity is not able to start drawing down funds, that will mean there will be a delay in grantees getting funds. So I believe that the steps that need to be taken to get the new entity set up with all of the insurances and the back-end infrastructure they need to be running as an organization can get done. I think, as Julia mentioned, the programmatic aspects and the engagement that are part of the spirit and intention of the Youth Fund, that's going to take time to ramp up and get going. And I think, again, what I think I hear everybody in here saying is the process for launching the next RFP, not the continuation grants, but the next RFP is going to take some time to do it in the way that the community supports and is in the spirit of the original intention of the Youth Fund.
So I just want to speak to the miracle point. So it absolutely will take substantial work in order for this to happen. And the only way that it is actually happening is that, one, I'll just say, the only miracles I've ever seen happen because people have faith in what they're doing and are committed to go the extra mile. This is a team that has done that and frankly has been doing that for almost 5 years. So none of the people who are involved in the transition to the new intermediary are new people. This is something that we have been working on since 2015, many of us. And so the commitment to making this work is the only thing that is going to achieve the miracle that you are talking about. And it isn't that we do not have the capacity and the passion to make it happen. And so what you have heard is that we also are thinking about all of the systems and support that's necessary, and we have built organizations. And so we also know how to get this job done. So I just wanted to underscore the fact that most of the team has been doing this work for free for years. And that is what is going to get this done.
Thank you.
Right.
Oh, you said that.
Right.
Can we just find out who you are?
All right. Again, thank you. We're going to hear from Marvin Hayes from the Baltimore Compost Collective. Is Robin Theodorensen still here? Okay, so we're going to hear from Mr. Hayes. After that, we'll hear from Hassan Amin.
Good evening. I'm going to be brief. My name is Marvin Hayes, and I'm the program manager for the Baltimore Compost Collective. We serve the Filbert Street Garden, which I like to call the Wakanda of South Baltimore, where we don't make vibranium, but we made black gold, Filbert Street, soil enhancer. I just want to speak on behalf of the Youth Fund. Want to thank United Workers for being our sponsor, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and for them giving opportunity to young people to be trained in small-scale composting and saving the city. I spoke to about 60 youth from Ben Franklin High School, and I asked 2 questions. I asked them what was their favorite fruit, because we know all fruit can be composted. And I asked them, did they have anybody in their family that was affected from cancer or asthma? And 60 of those youth answered that they were affected by asthma. We have to stop burning trash. This youth fund has gave an opportunity for me to be for the Baltimore Compost Collective to be the model for composting for Baltimore City. So I'm so excited to be able to do that. I spoke of the Wakanda of South Baltimore. In the news, Baltimore City has been called the city in crisis. And one of the greatest quotes from the Black Panther movie was, in times of crisis, while the foolish build barriers, the wise build bridges. So thank you, Associated Black Charities and the Youth Fund, for creating that bridge for Baltimore Compost Collective to serve the affected people of Curtis Bay and Brooklyn who are affected by trash burning and incineration. So thank you. Please continue with our campaign, Learn So You Don't Have to Burn, Starve the Incinerator, Feed the Soul, Feed the Community. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, Hassan Amin is going to be followed by Shauna Murray Brown. Okay. Shauna is going to be followed by Monique Levy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Shauna Murray Brown. I am a community healer, integrative psychotherapist, clinical social worker, born and raised here in the city of Baltimore. I am also the executive director of Kindred Community Healing, one of the organizations that was awarded funds for our community initiative, Sister Soul Quest. Sister Soul Quest was executed at Matthew Henson Elementary Middle with 25 girls and their mothers. Over the course of the school year, during the school day, 4th and 5th grade girls were able to come into what they called safe space, learn mind-body skills that center African-American culture of healing, while also really finding the tools to be able to address not only community trauma, but also personal trauma, intergenerational trauma, and address some of the effects of racism like internalized depression. What we center in Sister Soul Quest is this reliance on and development of the skill of how to heal themselves. But we didn't stop there. And as a result of the funding from the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, we were also able to hold healing space for their mothers, their grandmas, their fathers and uncles, those in their family unit that care for them. Because what we find, and what I've found in my experience as a clinical social worker who has worked in not only child welfare, but in the prison system, and am now a doctorate student here in the city of Baltimore, is that what often happens is we interrupt the usual pathway of wisdom shared intergenerationally. And so in alignment with many of the skills, many of the values of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, I was for the first time able to execute this program that was vastly informed by my own experience as a Black girl growing up in the city of Baltimore, where my mom struggled with addiction. And so it's really important for us to understand that not only the value of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund for, yes, it's really challenging. Bureaucracy is stressful. We've been sitting here for I don't know how long listening to and going through all of the questions, but when we really go back to deciding to center community and what equity actually looks like, it means that the moms at the Matthew Henson Elementary, that the dads, that the grandparents were also able to engage in this experience of remembering how to heal themselves. I'm not giving anyone anything new. We are remembering what our grandmas taught, and perhaps throughout the experience of community trauma and systemic oppression we've forgotten. And so I think that it's really also important to center the fact that when I was a little girl, these were the programs that I requested, that I wanted but didn't have access to. And 10 years ago is when I first established Sister Soul Quest. I was working as a child welfare worker just out of college at the University of Maryland, and I just knew that a gap was existing between what the government was able to provide to families like my own and what I felt needed to happen in order to center the healing experiences of Black girls, their parents, and children. And so it took me 10 years to be able to gain this funding to actually execute the program the way that was necessary. I applied 4 times over the course of that 10-year path, and I was denied each time because of it was considered not innovative enough because everybody has girl programs, right? But because the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund centered the values of the community and also allowed an opportunity for us to be able to talk about what it means to be accountable to community, I was provided with some of the resources to be able to manage a team of 3 social workers, 2 art healers, as well as 1 researcher to really be able to identify some of the outcomes. And so I know you might be wondering, what's some of the outcomes, Shauna? I got you. Okay, so not only were 100% of the girls able to grasp mind-body skills and be able to align it with what they deem Black culture, but so were their parents, right? All of the girls were articulated that they were more excited about coming to school, and they did not want to miss a sister circle, y'all. Okay? They made sure they came to school because they knew that they would be able to be in safe space. And there was also an increase in their leadership skill. So not only did we center the girls being able to grasp these skills on how to heal themselves for their independent self, not only did we create the environment for mothers and daughters to be able to execute this at home and in community, but we also empowered our now mind-body ambassadors at Matthew Henson Elementary to be able to hold the healing space for their peers to be able to do the very same. And so the other thing that I will say, because it is true that it was very stressful holding the space and managing this while this organization is going through its growing pains. But one of the underlying things that I have to center is the following, and that is recognizing that I was finally able to have the infrastructure and the support, the guidance, and the, what do you call it? The fancy word, support, what is it? Come on. Thank you, yes, technical assistance. Because I was able to have the technical assistance to be able to work through what will Sister Soul Quest and Kindred Community Healing look like in the future, when one of our girls called one of our social workers and expressed, hey, you know, my grandma was killed, can I have some support? This was after the BCYF funding period ended. Not only were we able to hold the healing space in the school, this extended to what I consider community care. And this is how we begin to reinvigorate what it means for communities to be able to be self-sufficient and to be able to establish the kind of relationships and skill sets to be able to continue. So the mamas from the spaces that were held at Matthew Henson Elementary came to the home and held the space to be able to remember all of the tools that were learned during the school year to support this family through a very real experience of community violence. And so I urge you, as you navigate and go through the very tough conversations around what it looks like to fortify this and the kind of bravery necessary to maintain your support of this innovation, to center the experiences of the children. If this funding stops, or even if the model stops, then people like me, born and raised here in Baltimore, that 10 years ago was saying, hey, pick me, finally my community picked me. Please don't make it so that my community can't keep picking me.
Okay, Monique, thank you. Monique Levy, followed by Mark Ferring.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Monique Levy, and I'm here representing the organization Led Ladies in Baltimore City. And because of the Baltimore City Youth Fund, we were able to actually launch our program, which is housing assistance. What we do is assist women who have gotten out there on their own. They don't have a lot of family support. They may have abusive background. We're able to help them with their rent, with a portion of their rent, to go along with what they have or whatever another organization has assisted them with. I actually wanted to touch on some points that were spoken of earlier from the Associated Black Charities, which was that we got to learn what we needed to learn during the process. And so it was really valuable for us to find out what did Led Ladies actually need to learn. We didn't know until we were actually given the opportunity to launch out there, start this organization, and see what we needed to build. We also were able to learn excellence during the process. So initially, we may have thought that we knew some things. I have a background of 10 years of nonprofit experience, so I thought I knew a lot until actually managing this grant. So I learned excellence during that time, and even how important the accounting part is, us making sure that we have an accountant in place. I don't get paid, but I have an accountant who I work overtime at my full-time job to make sure he gets paid to manage our finances. What else? I said capacity. And one more thing I want to touch on is the fact that we do what we love, and we're privileged to have the Baltimore City Youth Fund fund us, but we are volunteer staff. We do this out of our hearts. So, you know, even though some people may get paid for what they do, they're doing it because they love to do it, and we would do it anyway. So I'm sure that's even what the board was saying as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mark Ferring, followed by Corey McDaniel. Okay. Corey McDaniel, followed by Nika Namdi.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Corey McDaniel, aka Jabari the Barber Builder. Y'all saw my video probably a little bit earlier, but I'm the owner of Conscious Heads Barbershop, Natural Hair Salon, and the owner of the Conscious Heads Barber and Boot Camp. And what we do is we build barbers. We apprentice prep program, so we prepare people to be prepared to take an apprenticeship. So we give them all. So if it was like a analogy I must make, it's like basic training to be ready to go to war. We get you ready for barbering, you know what I mean? So we prepare you for that. So that's what we do. But I just want to say thank you to the Youth Fund, the opportunities, because we wasn't getting any money. And anytime you can find my students that I actually have, we cut like places for like haircuts for the homeless. So we've cut like well over in the last 2 years, probably over 1,000 or so heads, because we basically, people call us on Saturdays. I'll bring my students through. We go cut homeless. We cut people unfortunate in the community. And so now what the Youth Fund has done, because my program is cheap, like it costs $10,000 to go to barbering school. There is no financial aid for that right now. So I created a program where it's like, for a year, it's like $1,000. But still, as cheap as my program is, people can't afford it. So I've been able to take with the Youth Fund to bring people in who wouldn't normally be able to take my class, even people from the street that we bring in through that process and teach them from scratch. They didn't have no idea that they could cut hair, teach them from scratch how to cut hair. And it's afforded me the opportunity to build my facilities, to provide equipment and different things. So I'm really appreciative of the process and that we were selected for it. And I can't wait this year. We you know, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of mistakes that we make all around. So we've been learning from our mistakes, and I can't wait this year to approach it again, so that we can build more barbers and build more professionalism in the community. So that's all I want to say.
Awesome. Thank you. Nika, followed by Noi Sinakorn.
Good evening. I'm Nika Namdi, the creator of Fight Blight Be More and a BCYF grantee. Fight Blight Be More's research noted a lack of competent space in communities, particularly the Black Butterfly, for innovation. From that, we launched the Hack Hub in 2019 as a youth and community-based innovation space. The Youth Fund grant helped to support our effort to hire 8 youth workers to test the mobile app that we developed to help people in community report instances of blight. The youth workers learned about software development, project management, and public policy in the process of testing the app. They produced a test report for the app. They wrote a paper on the connection between mass incarceration and blight. And they also reported over 100 instances of blight or environmental concerns in Harlem Park and Upton. In a word, they're dope. Being in the first cohort of the Youth Fund was challenging but fruitful. As a systems engineer by trade, I know that the initial launch of any new system can be rocky. This was no different. The Youth Fund staff and its fiscal agent worked through issues. My technical assistance provider, Regina, was a great help navigating the sometimes rocky road. All in all, I support the Youth Fund, its mission to advance racial equity, create intergenerational leadership, create community ownership, and support collective decision-making. The grant enabled Fight Blight Be More to give its youth a work experience centered in the values of the Youth Fund, and for that, it was a success. I'd like to just make 3 additional notes. The government has no issue with innovation and working it out and failure when it's in defense spending. And we should have the same mindset in failing forward with our young people, encouraging innovation. The second is, a lot of times we don't talk about the economic violence that's actually being done. And one of the things that we heard tonight is that ABC did with 10% what they should have been given 25% to do. That is a problem. That is that typifies the violence that is done to Black businesses and institutions by government. You expect us to do more with less. And even when we produce excellence with the less, there's always some extra, I don't even know what the word is. There's always an extra expectation, and that has got to stop. And the third piece is that when you're dealing with social mission-driven organizations or businesses like Fight Blight Be More, we don't have nonprofit status. We don't seek it because it is not part of what we want to do is generate wealth and generate revenue, and that isn't the model for nonprofits, is the tax implications to social mission-driven businesses of taking these grants. Effectively, a $20,000 grant becomes a $15,000 grant because that comes to the organization as income. And so if that's a consideration going forward that the intermediary or that the city government definitely needs to focus on, because it makes it difficult for folks like me to stay in business and continue to do the work of building a beautiful Afro future right here in Baltimore. Thank you.
Real quick.
Yep.
So of the 20 that you received, you paid 5 in taxes?
Of the 16, this is my loose calculation, of the 16, darn it, I didn't bring it up here. Of the 16 that I received, roughly $5,400 of that was paid in taxes, because what happens is, as an LLC, what I receive from the fiscal agent is a 1099, and then I have to report that income. And unfortunately, that $16,000 was not income to me. It went to purchase 3D printers. It went to purchase a smart board. It went to purchase it went to purchase iPads that were used in the testing. So most of it went to supplies that enabled me to do the program, but it still is reported to the IRS as income.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Noy Sinacorn, and then Mary Alexander.
Hi, this is my first time doing this, so thank you all for listening to me today. So my name is Noy Sinacorn, and I'm basically here to represent Unique Fabrics Youth Group. I volunteered last summer for a few weeks, so I think I have something cool to say. But before I do that, I would just like to thank the chairman, the committee, the community, and all the men, women, and even children who've put out their effort, time, and at times money to allow these kids to have the opportunities that they have now. So basically, I'll talk about the program here. I wouldn't really compare it to a school, but what the program offered are a bunch of classes that teach students two different things. We have classes that teach students communication skills, how to talk confidently, competently, how to carry themselves in a way that demands respect. Things like filling out applications for colleges, preparing paperwork for job applications, things of the sort. And we also offer trades such as, I guess modeling counts, doing hair, sewing, working with computer and technology, and pretty much getting them prepared to work if they choose to do so instead of going straight into higher education if they have the ability. But basically what is offered at Unique Fabrics Youth Group is opportunity, which is incredibly important. I don't want to speak about myself too much, but I had a good time growing up. 2 parents love me, great community, plenty of opportunities, and I can say for sure that I'm very fortunate because these kids that have been coming up to the program, they don't have the things that I have. They don't have the opportunities, but what they do have is hunger. They have a drive. They just don't know how to channel that. They don't know what they're hungry for. They don't know what success is and how to get there. And that's what we offer. We can't offer everything, but what we do have is the ability to teach kids, to give them the tools that they need, and more importantly, the understanding of how to use them, to dig into the pavement, to dig into the ground, and make their own path to success, whatever that may be. But that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mary Alexander, followed by, apologies, can't read the first name, but Felda, I believe is the last name.
Linda Felda.
Linda.
Yeah. So I just want to pass some of my, sit down to Ms. Diane and I. Thank you. Noy was actually one of the persons that I was able to hire using the youth fund. So he came and volunteered, and the complaint that I had, right? He came and volunteered in my program, and once I saw his commitment, I was able to use some of the ABC funding that I received in order to give him a stipend for what he was doing in my program, which was a lot of useful hard work helping kids. He actually helped people fill out FAFSAs and Pell Grants. Okay, so my name is Mary Alexander. I was one of those mid-level persons who received BCYF funding last year with my Youth Jobs Initiative, okay?
Perfect.
And so being a taxpayer and being a lifelong time Baltimorean, it was great to be able to give back to the community without pulling from my personal finances in my home. Okay, some of the things that I see moving forward is that the new board needs to have either some present or former grantees sitting on that board. Okay, that's going to give a different perspective. So save 2 seats for grantees to be on that new board. Moving forward, we need to create legislative languages that's going to put a cap on the fiscal sponsors. Currently, right now, me and my fiscal sponsor are dealing with the fact that they want to ask me for 16% versus the 10% that we agreed upon when this grant, and there's no legislation. This is not an ABC thing or anybody else thing. This is a legislation. If you put a policy in place that's going to protect the grantees to keep the money in the community, we won't have these problems. Moving forward, we need to help people debrief. There was some resentment from people who know me because they didn't get the grant. At some point in time, we just got to give up the ghost that some people may not have written the grant well. That's not to say that they couldn't have executed it. Maybe it wasn't chosen for some other reason, but they did not know. So what happened in the first year is that people found out, like me, that we got the grant, and I was talking to people who did not get a no. So please give that no before you give the yes. That's going to save a lot of problems out in the community. Another thing that I want to say is that I don't think this young lady right here completely knew what she was talking about, because one thing that they do not do is give out their second go-round of funding without the first 2 rounds being audited and being approved. So right now, as it stands, February, March, and April will be the first quarter. That means that they get ready to make this transition in July the 1st, and also mark the fact that July 1st is the first day of Youth Works. So people like me are going to be bringing in new children into our program on that day 1. It does not make sense to take ABC out the picture and put somebody in new, because they're going to be right in the middle of quarter 2. So you should not be getting your second wave of money until your first 2 quarters are audited, completed, and said that you actually handed in every receipt and that you met that, that threshold of making sure all your documentation is in. So why would you change in the middle of quarter 2? I don't understand that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so quarter 2 starts at quarter 2 starts May, June, and July. So if they're going to start on July the 1st and make a transition like that, that's going to put me at a disadvantage. I really don't quite know how, but I don't think that they're telling the complete picture on this. I say we need to just go ahead and pay ABC more money, let them take us all the way to January 2021, since that's what this current second year. So then for those of us who have already established that relationship, will feel a smoother transition. I'm a little leery about the new people who say they're going to come on board and do great things. They always say these things and great narratives on paper, but when they go to put it in practice, they're going to find out that it's not as smooth as they say. Okay? And lastly, lastly, I just want to say, as a black person growing up in Baltimore, so many times I've seen where we take nothing and we make the best out of it, and then the next group of people come along and they get so much more, and then they do grander things. I want ABC. I want this to stay in the hands of minority. I would love to see us continue to use ABC. Now, I'm not speaking for ABC. I'm speaking for a taxpayer who pays my taxes. I love to see black folk succeed, and I don't necessarily believe that they were given all the tools, because I'm in the trenches. So I'm one of the grantees that had a lot of problems, and I may not agree with everything that Kira and them said to me, but it made sense. They taught me a lot. There was a lot of things that I had to come up on my own to understand how to report what I was doing. And I may not have done it well, because I'm one of those persons, I may not write a well-written narrative, but I execute out the ballpark. You understand what I'm saying? So until you get on the field, I don't care how many backup quarterbacks you got, until you get on the field and take that first hit, you can talk all the smash you want. So a lot of us needed to get in the game, but we weren't prepared. But I would believe that there is some room to help people prepare, even if they got to do a letter of intent or an application of intent. Start understanding who's out there asking for what, and kind of reach to those people and say, okay, I need to help prepare you. Because that's the one key piece that I think is missing in the community. And I would like to see ABC continue to work along with us. I don't want to break in a whole new group of people right in the middle of my program. Please do not do that. They tell you they're going to do this, and I'm just a little leery. Lastly, I know some people say, volunteering, showing that you love something, and et cetera, and they've been volunteering for 5 years and 2 years. I love what I do too, but I like to get paid for it because I know my worth. And I don't like it when people try to make it seem like black folk, we got to go ahead and volunteer versus getting paid. I wrote myself a salary into my grant, and I don't apologize for it. And I think that for some reason, we are that role model that the next generation is seeing. And I think that we need to stop telling them that we got to be the whipping boy all the time, and we always got to be the sacrificial lambs in our community, when in fact people use our demographics to get money. So I just hope and pray that we continue to work along. Unique Fabrics, I have filled out my application. I just got a nice email that they need some more information from me. I'm going to smile when I say that. So I don't have any money yet, but if I don't get the money, you're going to have at least 25 children who do not get jobs next year, because I will not be able to have a youth work site. What you see right here, some program items print and design. Our kids came up with these T-shirts, and then what I did with the youth fund money was that they made the T-shirts, and then I donated the T-shirts to Collington Square so that they can use it as a fundraiser. So those pieces of monies that we use, sometimes we don't know how we're going to do it, but when things and the needs in the community come up in our program, we have money to do it with, and that's the most important piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Felda, you're up next. Followed by MJ Lanier.
Okay. I'm one of the facilitators for Unique Fabrics, and I've taught the children through Youth Works. I teach sewing. For me, it's a basic life skill that's lost. A lot of people say that it's not important. To me, it is. Along with that is etiquette, which is just the everyday life of living that children don't know. So by me teaching these children this, and they're indulged with, wow, I can thread a machine, I can sew something just as simple as a pillow or something that they've created themselves. The thing that I'm praying that Murray still gets this, because not only that I teach at Youth Works, I taught adults, I taught seniors, I taught teenagers. So this pattern will keep going on and on, but if not, it stops. Even with me, I have my own nonprofit. I teach in public schools. I teach sewing, I teach etiquette. I have a mobile bus that I, through Warnock, gave me a grant, and I funded that mobile bus. And a lot of the stuff you do out of pocket on your own, but I do understand, and it's a learning center. I teach etiquette and fashion on that too. What I do understand is that our children need this, and we need to take them back to the basics, and that is a part of what Unique Fabric brings to the table. And I'm happy to be a part of her organization. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. MJ Lanier will be followed by Queen Wilson.
Hola, I'm MJ, that's short for Mary Jalil. I'm born and raised in Baltimore and the product of a lot of successful programs. I went to Glenmount Elementary Middle, I went to Baltimore City College, and I graduated from Towson University. I actually took part in a capacity building program out of University of Maryland that was taking community members, giving them the skills and the historical knowledge to understand how systems work and operate, and how that's basically not an equitable, they don't operate in an equitable fashion, and giving us the tools and the skills to help organizations make that transition and serve our communities in an equitable way, even if the systems aren't set up to be equitable. In that process, I took a nonprofit job, developed a great program, served a lot of kids, and then they didn't keep up the equitable practices, right? Because there was no system holding them accountable to the making sure it was community members that were facilitating program, and making sure that we had 7 routes of communication to the parents, not just 1 email, because who's reading email if that's not your job every day? None of those intentional practices that I was taught to put in place by my great liberal arts college and my really great nonprofit government-funded AmeriCorps program, none of those things, they didn't have to do any of them. And the Youth Fund, through the development of the process, has been an inspiration to me, just as a person from Baltimore that's not trying to leave and really doesn't want to leave, but is equitable and trying to decolonize America and our consciousness. The Youth Fund was an example for me. Oh, snap, the government will do this? Things can be in process that are equitable and follow valid processes. For me, this was also an example of reparations. In the country, there's been like 35 types of reparations. Sometimes it's monetary, sometimes it's restitution, and sometimes it's just agreements made, like Georgetown just decided, the students themselves decided to increase their tuition to pay reparations to the slaves that were sold by the Jesuits to solidify the university in the country. And like those actions, this is basically one that the city has decided on. I appreciate it as a master capacity builder. I go to University of Maryland right now. I'm a macro social worker. And like macro social work is using social innovation to change systems. And this is a perfect example of that. It's also a perfect example of like systems not being aware of how long it takes to actually do stuff. But this happening, one, the way that it has happened in the formal process that was very inclusive and at every step for multiple levels, to continue that on, have the small transition, lift up Black organizations that are doing work that nobody else does. This has been very revolutionary. It's gives me hope as a young person to go into government, to go into leadership positions. I've actually literally used the youth fund process as an example in class at the School of Social Work, who's working on being a more equitable institution, and the University of Maryland is working on being a more equitable institution. I've used this process as an example to properly do things and properly engage the community. So thank y'all, and thank you for allowing this to happen. And don't get bogged down on this might take too long or this doesn't sound right. If you think it needs more time, give it more time, because like, y'all got the power. So yeah, that's my piece, I say.
Thank you. All right. Queen Wilson, followed by Renee Tangella. Great.
Good evening. I am Dr. Renee Tangella, and this is my partner, Queen Wilson. We are from Peaceful Warriors, Inc. We provide yoga, mindfulness, and meditation to youth and families in Baltimore.
Both of us are products of Baltimore City, and what we found out is that as we were getting older,
If you
more
could
mature,
speak into the mic, just because it's on Charm TV, so I want to make sure your testimony is there.
products of Baltimore City, products of Baltimore City, we discovered as we were getting mature, not older, that we needed something more to keep us moving, and part of that was our younger population. So we provide yoga, mindfulness, and meditation to children and youth in Baltimore City, and we were able to do that on the east side of town and on the west side of town, but what we discovered was there was an untapped population of older adults, which we tapped into as well. But what we would like to also have you all experience, just very, very briefly, since we've been here since the dawn of day, 5 p.m., we would like you all to just relax your shoulders back, bring them up and bring them back, just a little bit, and it just releases those endorphins. It releases endorphins and energy, moving them up and down, all around, and if you want to get the wiggle, just a little bit, just to shake it off. We get kids to do that. We engage children. We engage families. We also hold space for the violence that happened in Baltimore City. We were able to hold space for a group of close to 200 families and individuals in Baltimore City at the Zeta Center. Because of the gun violence, there was a lot of collaboration. So we were able to hold space so that families and individuals can come and have an avenue for which to release. And it was very, very, very emotional at the time, but just not enough because the violence is all around us. So we do thank you.
Always have to tap her, tap me in, okay? But we have been friends for 30 years, and we have recognized that in our work, she's a counselor, I'm an educator, that the things that we have done to help us just live longer, I guess, in the best way we can, and to raise families and so on as something that I wanted to get certified for, and she did too, so that we could bring it to the populations we serve. So when BCYF came, when this was offered to us, we felt like this was a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to take what we do on a continuous basis, personally, but also into our schools, into our organizations, to do more of it, to be able to have the materials we need. So if we're called to yoga, we have the mats, we have the blocks, we have the materials, we have the music, we have the yes, we need, so that we can set the space, create intentional spaces for people to feel safe, to release, to relax, to have stress. When you leave, most of our participants feel like when they leave our spaces that they have left the weight of the world on the mat or the weight of the world in the chair, because for some we do chair yoga. So we are so excited about an opportunity to do it again, because we felt like this first year we had some struggles with our fiscal agent, same situations with the sister, with the graphic design about, just communication was an issue. We felt like sometimes our needs were not being met by not BCYF, because BCYF, every time we called, Danielle Terrain was our first TA, and then we had Mary Warren, two wonderful women who are there to support us in this work. So it's been a tremendous, it's a small amount of money, but it means everything, because it is allowing us to bring what we feel is necessary to our communities that we serve. We also would like to say that a lot of hand-holding was happening, because we've been around for a while, but we're new to this process. We are a new organization. We are new to grant writings and all the metrics and things that are required for us to provide. And so we felt like the organization was intentional about making sure that if we needed help, they were going to give us help. So we appreciate that. Also, but as I was hearing my people who got funded with us, I would like for us to consider a possible support group, because if I would have known that the people who got the grant with me do all these things, then we would have not had to go out to other people to give us the graphic design. We could possibly provide our services to the sister who has the sister circle and so on. So we just want to be able to help each other more. And if there's a problem that maybe we're better at or someone else is better at, we can lean on each other so that we can go through this process this second time around where we are just, fabulous. Yes. So, anything else? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Miss Trueheart still here? All right. If someone could grab Miss Kim. While she is coming back, is Catherine Cooper here? Come on.
Thank you. As you said, my name is Catherine Cooper Nicholas, and I am the founder of Sisters Saving the City. We have a youth center in Park Heights, and I, for one, was very disappointed that we didn't get any funding from the Youth Fund. Now, as I have sat in this room and heard some of the challenges that some of the organizations have had, we have our own 501c3. We also have a fiscal agent. We have always passed our audits, because we have to have a separate audit because we are a nonprofit. I really don't know what that process was. We are in the Park Heights community. Not one organization that applied from Park Heights received funding. Every day, my children walk the streets of Park Heights to come to our center so they can be safe. From time to time, our street is blocked off because there was a shooting down at the corner store, and the police come by and say, don't let them out, but we're going to take care of you. I just don't know what it takes for those folks that are in charge of the money to understand that we need resources. We need to be able to know that next month and the month after and next year that we're going to be able to take care of our kids. When we did the end-year report that we had to do for our funding, we served 151 children. Now, is my partner, is she here? Okay. Because I want her to tell you, my responsibility is to make sure we got a facility. She brings in the programs. There were programs before we bought her, but I want her to talk about those programs that we have at Sisters Saving the City.
Is this one working?
Oh, you can do it.
Hey, Mr. Zeke Cohen, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Hi, y'all. I'm Danelle Pender. I am the founder of Excellence and Ambition, and I am also a program partner at Sisters Saving the City. That is out where we are headquartered, our location. Ms. Catherine wants to talk about the programs. Without the facility, we would not be able to have the program that we have. We were, in 2015, we were homeless. as an organization, and literally I had about 15 young people in my living room making music and designing clothes and doing all the stuff. And so to get them out of my living room, I talked to Miss Catherine, and she allowed us to go and be at her space for free. We've been there since 2017, and there are 6 other partners. So it's Excellence and Ambition, Full Blast Steam, Oni Vintage Showing and Fashion. There is, I know I'm missing them, Be More Than Dance. There's BFAB Radio Show. There is the Sister Circle with Yamadi. There is also a cosmetology space upstairs. Community leadership and engagement, and we teach soft skill, professionalism, workforce development, entrepreneurship. So in the building, there are 6 program partners, each having a budget of $50,000 or more. And so when we applied, we said, should we apply all as one, or should we try to each individual organization, grassroots, try to apply separately? And we all went in as one, and the amount was, I guess, too much. And even though I said, okay, well, we're also going to apply separately just in case it is too much, maybe as a smaller grassroots we could. And then I was told something about, I don't know, but I know that our documentation is tight, our binder work is tight, we keep our receipts, we have our payroll system in place, we have the When I Work in place for scheduling for our young people who receive stipends. All those things are there. Our board is in place for Excellence and Ambition, and Sister Saving the City had Strong City as a fiscal sponsor. So to say that we didn't have the things in place, we actually went to a meeting, a follow-up meeting, to find out what happened and why our score was like, and literally it was like, oh, you were 2 points away. And we were like, okay, that's great. So what are the next resources for us? If you can't, that's fine, we get it. Y'all, you were stretched too thin, great. What are some other resources? Where else can we go? Because we applied for the larger foundations. They come and visited and said we did great work, and they loved what we were doing, and they saw our kids and loved our kids, but they didn't fund us. So where do we go now? So that's kind of what I'm asking for, is kind of, if you don't get the grant, if we go for the next grant cycle and we don't get selected again, could we please have could those resources for technical assistance be available even to us moving forward to get everybody that is grassroots to the next level, and even if you don't get selected? And then also, could we have those other funders at the table to say, okay, if the youth fund can't do it, how about this foundation or that foundation? Thank you.
And one other thing I wanted to say, and it's kind of hard for me to say it, but my motivation for doing what I do is that my son was murdered. And in 2007, my son was standing on a bus stop, and he was stabbed 15 times by 2 teenagers who were trying to get into a gang. When we went, now he survived that, when we went to court, and this is what motivated me. When we went to court, there were 2 rows of supporters of the boys who stabbed my son. And they taunted us, they threatened us, and we're standing up there. And they had to call a guard into the courtroom to take us out. Now, I didn't feel bitter. We didn't feel bitter about them. You know, we moved here from rural Pennsylvania. You know, it was like, you know, these kids didn't have the opportunity. This is my son. They didn't have the opportunities that I did. I went all over the place. You know, Mom, you got to do something about that. And so that was my motivation. But then my son, always volunteering, and a young man that he was helping out, he said the voices told him to kill my son. And he beat my son to death. So I relive it a lot, and sometimes I just can't talk about it straight. But that's not the exception here anymore. It's the norm. We have a lot of people who are being killed in different ways, and mental health, mental illness has a lot to do with it. So It's not that we really want to do these things, but we've got to do them. And I thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And I would just ask, perhaps afterward, if you all could perhaps follow up just on that technical assistance piece, because I think it's a really good question. Thank you. All right, Ms. Trueheart, followed by Terrellyn Tyrell.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kim Trueheart, born and raised here, proudly 63 years ago, last week. So wish me happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Okay. I was on the task force that helped formalize all of this. And I am pleased that we have come thus far, but I'm also disappointed that we have not fully delved into the issue here. You know, Baltimore City was chartered in 1797, and we still have inequities and oppressive kinds of practices in this government that this initiative was going to attempt to overcome. So I'm here to tell you we still got a ways to go, okay? So what should that look like is the question and the purpose of this hearing. And how do we move forward to ensure that the communities of color are being fairly treated, equitably treated, invested in particular our young people. And we haven't talked about that much this evening, but I'm sure we're going to recess and continue that dialogue. But one of the more important things is that government seems to have thrown $12 million over the fence and said, go make it work. That's not what my expectation is. There ought to be a government program office that administers this, that monitors what's going on, that is fully staffed to direct the activities of the intermediary or the next iteration of it. I don't see that. And it can't rest in somebody's back pocket, because when it does, that means it doesn't get the attention that it needs. It doesn't get the focus that it needs. This program is too important for us to let it languish. I applaud ABC for what they've done. I really appreciate Diane Bell McCoy. In fact, I love Diane Bell McCoy. But I'm going to be critical where I need to be critical. And this ain't working for me. The other issue is, if we're going to stand up an entity to administer the funds, not create the programmatic structure, not to create the policy, but to administer the funds, it sort of reminds me of a couple of other entities, quasi-government entities that this city has stood up. Baltimore Development Corporation, quasi-nonprofit government enterprise. They have board meetings. They are obligated to tell us when those meetings are. They are obligated to publish announcements of those meetings, post minutes of those meetings. So if this interim kind of thing has had 2 meetings already, I want to see the minutes. I want to know when the 3rd meeting is. Okay. I'm concerned that we're going to drop the ball. And I don't know what that means, but I'm concerned. And I heard other people express their concerns as well. And so we need to tighten up this thing. We need to make sure it's going to go down the right path. It's not being managed out of somebody's back pocket on part-time basis. It is too important for that. It is way too important. I have been one that has been, since day one, talking about the need for investing in our nonprofit community. I went to Mr. Paul Taylor, the director of the Small Business Development Enterprise here in this city, and I said, just like you are investing in for-profit enterprises, you need to take time to invest in nonprofits as well. And so I need you to set up some programming, right, within the Small Business Development Enterprise that reaches out and engages nonprofits, startups, right, those who wish to be, right? I think the government has a responsibility to help develop those enterprises, to take on the services and programs that the government can't provide. We suck at that now, but I'm sure somebody's going to put some legislation in, and we're going to get something going that invests in developing nonprofits to provide the services and programs that we need in this city. I've also been making a lot of noise here about the minority and women-owned business enterprise. I see all of this aligning. I see the importance of us putting money in the hands of black entities, black and brown, but black first, okay? And I don't see a concerted effort to do that. Y'all disappointed me, really are disappointing me, because we cannot half-step in this, but we have been. There is a comprehensive approach to investing in our young people that we are failing to carry out. I don't get it. I get that some of y'all think your jobs are just part-time jobs, but there's some other folks around here who have full-time jobs. Make them work. Make them work. And if you got to legislate it, that should be easy. It takes 8 votes, right? Legislate something. Make them work to help put this Baltimore Children and Youth Fund into full effect. Because I ain't going to stand here and be nice no more, right? Because I'm going to go out to the cameras and the reporters and everybody else and tell how we have only half committed to the children and youth of Baltimore City. And y'all playing with them. Stop playing with them. Get serious. That was the whole intent behind this. Get serious. Put the resources in place. A government program office needs to step up and do something. I absolutely have been one from day one saying 10% ain't enough to administer this program, knowing that the government was going to abrogate half of its responsibilities. And that's what they did. They said, oh, well, ABC will take care of it. That ain't happening. The government needs to do its part. The technical assistance, the business development stuff, all of that should be government resourced kinds of things. And if you want to throw it over the side, okay, throw some more money over the side with it. I did not receive a grant. I think I deserve to get a grant, but I ain't going there right now. But there are a lot of organizations in this city deserving of the grant that didn't get it. So while this is an oversight hearing, okay, there needs to be more conversation around who got grants and who didn't. You see, I'm one that says, don't be coming to me telling me you gave me the Maryland Food Bank a grant again. Because when they drop the food on the sidewalk in front of my building, who gets it inside? I gotta go do that? Me and my cane? You want me to take the 8,000 pounds of stuff that they just dropped on my sidewalk with no help, right? Because that's what you're telling me. You're telling me the little small groups in this city who deliver the food to these insecure families and children and youth, right? They don't deserve to get the funding, right? Because you got the Maryland Food Bank who gets donations from every place under the friggin' sun. But ain't nobody helping me. You know, if my freezer breaks down tomorrow, what am I supposed to do? If one of my refrigerators breaks down tomorrow, what am I supposed to do? Maryland Food Bank ain't gonna bring me a new freezer or refrigerator, but they'll bring me the frozen foods that they got donated from Safeway. They didn't have to pay for that. Yeah, they had to drive the truck to my sidewalk. Y'all need to think, you know, one of the things, where is she? The Baltimore Children and Youth Fund Executive Director. I need a strategic plan for youth. I've only been asking for it since 2010. The strategic plan for youth will lay out the priorities of this city, the needs of our children. And I'm going to talk for a minute more, not much more. But it needs to ensure that the money is invested according to the prioritization of meeting the needs of our children and youth. Not on some whim, right? Not because I'm best friends with somebody, but because we're going to solve some problems. Now, I haven't seen the strategic plan for youth yet, but if this were the strategic plan for youth, and this was the list of awardees in the right hand, would they match? Would they overlap? I'd like to think so, but I doubt it. Thank you for holding this hearing, sir. I appreciate you. We got to do better. This is, and I don't curse, this is half-ass, okay?
Thank you, Ms. Trueheart. Next up, Terrellyn Tyrell. Terrellyn Tyrell, going once, twice. Cornell Jefferson.
Hi, how you doing today? My name is Cornell Jefferson. I am 19, and I am a youth that actually came from a lot, being honest with you. I came from, and when I mean from a lot, I'm talking about actually homeless. Used to be not that far from right here, Lake Street. And with the three organizations I actually am involved in is, one is Yes, two is Seco, and three is Sister Saving the City. With all of them, they actually been helping me and actually been building me back up from where everybody been actually dropping me down and actually tearing me apart. And it started off from Yes, going to Yes each day, trying to actually go by each day, try to actually go ahead, try to get my to-go bag, try to get my tokens, and try to do that. Yes, bring me to Seco. Seco give me the mindset and the business mindset that actually say I can actually do whatever I want. And Sister Say the City actually bring me into the light that actually you can actually do this, they can help me. And with all these organizations right there, it actually push me to actually keep on driving. And with that, that's where you see me here today. Yes, I'm still down my luck, but then they with all these organizations right here actually pushing me and driving me. I'm going to be better. One thing I got right here is actually a book. Yes, I actually been making actually just finally gotten done. If they finally just gotten working. This is something that actually youth from been actually working on. And not oh yeah, we gotta do this. No, they've been actually working on that. I can't actually blame them, put credit and say I did it, made this book with them. But I can actually prove for my peers and all that. Oh, we've been actually doing certain things doing certain things that actually make the community look better. Doing certain things that actually make a positive change. Remember, this shoe right here. And Sister Saving the City, I'm going to go ahead and make these shoes better than what they is right now, because that's what this is one of the things they actually do. But other days they actually saying that, oh yeah, saying we go and look on the streets and guess what, we fall into certain days on the streets. Sister Saving the City actually put certain days in place where we got things we can put in our mind. Tell you the truth, it started off from just, with the shoes and all, it started off from just, how can I say it, with all the teenagers, and only what you know now, we got kids trying to actually do it. And that's actually sometimes making us proud enough, because some fact that now the person that taught us is now we gotta teach them. And that's teaching us to actually be better leaders and better followers in the same time too. And why I said followers, because some fact that how we gotta lead to follow. Plus, like, with all these illustrations, I just found out today, and that's the reason why I came a little late, I actually got a job now on Monday. 7:30 on the dot, that's where I'm going to be at, because of all these illustrations. And sometimes, with these illustrations right here, everybody think they're already good and all, but the whole time, they got problems in their own. And what I mean by that, yes. Sometimes they only had tokens that actually give out to people, and sometimes the little papers that actually give them the ID, give people the IDs. And sometimes that be hard. Sometimes they be hungry at them, because something that we get mad at them. But sometimes if you actually dating, it's not the program's fault. It's so many programs out here, but the only reason why I picked them is because something that they actually been helping me. I've been through a couple programs, and sometimes they ain't been helping me or just trying to just keep on pushing me along. And I'm glad that these programs right here have been actually pushing me and actually keep on going, and actually not pushing me and drive and be like, oh yeah, you can do this and do that. No, actually push me physically and emotionally, like they really care about somebody. And these are programs we should keep, and these are programs we should actually put money into. Because something that how, it's not just benefit, it's just something that I'm just the only one here. But there's other people that actually feel the same way as me. They actually say that I used to been down on Lake Street, right there near the 7-Eleven and the Royal Farms, panhandling right there. From now, I actually talking about, oh yeah, I'm going to actually try to get a food truck. You feel me? That's what these illustrations actually pushed me to do. So imagine we actually push money into the organizations that actually do, so they can actually help more on youth. And that's my time.
Thank you, and congratulations on your job and on your book. Olu Woods, come on up. Olu followed by Kaensha Doherty.
Good night. Good night.
Good evening.
I am the interim executive director of Do More Baltimore, that uses art to civically engage marginalized communities. And I'm so grateful for the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. I'm so grateful for all the work that has gone into this innovation, the thought, the labor of all that are involved. And every time I go to a Baltimore Children and Youth fund event. I know it is not everybody, as we've heard, some people who are in the community that did not get the fund, but I know that the people in that room, I've been a village builder since my entire adult life, and those people in the room let me know I'm in the right place, and I'm honored to be in that room with those people who I know are passionate and very functional in what they've been able to achieve without, and certainly with the funds. I wanted to just briefly push back against something very simple, which is the word incompetent wasn't used, but that the different grantees did not have the capacity to do what was needed. This summer, I had to use my Meyerhoff Scholar engineering degree a whole lot. I learned a lot about accounting, and I appreciate that. I sent my children away so that I could do the reporting. I sent them to go stay with their grandmother instead of doing programming. And I found out that that was unnecessary. I found out that it was something very simple that would have saved me from flailing my arms, as well as many of the other people in this room who have cried. Like, I've been with them, and they have cried about this, which was communication. What was missing and is missing is communication. Tonight, I have learned so much about the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, and I don't know why I didn't know those things before. And I have equally said this to my fiscal sponsor, who was experiencing challenges, that why didn't they just bring us to the table and talk to us about these challenges in real time? We're capable. Not only are we capable, we are extremely competent. So the people who are growing from programming to doing more administrative and meeting those needs, they are extremely competent and amazing people who, with given information and training, can meet every standard. Absolutely. I don't have any doubt in my mind about that. And so communication has been extremely missing, and I think it's something that's very simple, that's overlooked, especially as we are working to decolonize ourselves in our spaces and how we engage with the community. We do not have the luxury to not communicate and to not build relationships. And so likewise, on all the levels, in all the spaces, looking for that relationship. And a lot of us, we have the skills. We could have gone into corporate or otherwise, but besides our passion, there's some things that are not appealing about that. I did not work for Lockheed Martin and work for my community for a variety of reasons, but one is gaslighting and grandstanding is like some of the reasons why some people don't end up communicating. And as a leader, being able to be transparent and saying, when I'm messing up, I have to be able to say that to the people, the young people as well as the people I work with. I'm messing up right now, or I messed up. I can't bring another incompetency to a mistake by pretending that it's not there. So I'm not saying that anybody did that specifically, but this idea of communication and keeping us all aware and abreast of what's going on would have saved me hours and hours this summer. I was meeting standards that I could not have met alone, but I was getting information, various information from all different directions that was conflicting. So I wanted to just say some simple things, and this is not necessarily for any one particular entity in this room, but I feel like the technical assistance is a great opportunity, but they were not empowered. They didn't know, I feel like they didn't know what was going on, and I didn't feel like it was their fault. Not really that it's about a fault, but I think that's a great system, but they can be a way to get information to us if they know what is going on. I went to every BCY, if BCYF was having an event, a lunch, a online thing, I went. And I went to get the information, but also to find out what was going on, because I didn't know. And then when I asked, I didn't get any answers sometimes. So training in clear standards. We were told, I don't know about how the information got to me incorrectly, but we keep receipts, we keep a variety of things. We do our due diligence in that way, but the standards of reporting at a time when philanthropy, I feel like, is moving in the opposite direction. They're moving towards less, not accountability, there's a variety of ways for people to be accountable, but to less burdensome accounting and reporting, so that if we give you the money, we're saying, we believe in you, go do the work. There's a less burdensome reporting that comes with that. So philanthropy, it feels like it's moving in that direction, where they answer some simple questions. Did you do these things? Did you do this? Tell us what you did. And it's just the opposite, in this direction. And so that's mostly what I wanted to say about, I feel like even right now, I don't know what's going on. And that is not for a lack of trying and attempting. So I know that, just to be very specific, the fiscal sponsors were, we were with our fiscal sponsor before the BCYF, but it was promoted as a way for people to be able to meet the standards. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand fiscal sponsorship. It is a little bit of a conundrum, like, we don't really exist legally, but we are the ones who got funded. And I feel like it went from me getting different messages to no messages. So as of right now, I do not know what's going on with our status. And I do have a meeting with my fiscal sponsor on Tuesday, but I was told when I reached out to to my TA to find out what's going on, she reached out to somebody and they said, go ask your fiscal sponsor. And I didn't feel that that was an appropriate answer. I can ask my fiscal sponsor, we work together, but I'm the one, we are the organization that was granted the youth fund resources to do the job. And so just being able to have some clear communication, and I just look forward to working with more asset-based minded gatekeepers, and thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Kensha Doherty.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Kanisha Doherty. I'm the Executive Director of Creative Nomads. We are an organization that does arts, music, and cultural programming inside of the schools, community centers, but also we support arts professionals. We received a grant from BCYF for our Drumming with Dad program, which is an innovative and unique way to do parent engagement inside of the schools using the African drum as a tool that allows for children and for the adults, the dads or the male caregivers, to exercise certain muscles like collaborative learning, active listening, effective communication, and team building. I want to thank BCYF for believing in the project enough to be able to give us funding, but I think that they gave us so much more in opportunity besides just the money. But before that, I think that the opportunity of the Youth Fund has been missed by the community and by the public. I go on, Facebook, and I'm in certain groups, and I see what people say about the fund, and I feel like they don't understand why the fund was even created. That it's not an ordinary foundation that's just giving funding away, but why it's equitable and how it's being done. And because there is no understanding of what's happening, people have a bad light of what the fund is. Also, I think that a lot of the grantees don't have an idea that the fund was created the way that it's created, and that it was and still is being structured a certain type of way. And because of that, I think that a lot of people have been frustrated because they didn't realize that that pretty much we are a test case that hopefully will be nurtured and grow into what it's supposed to be. But I think that a lot of grantees were frustrated because they didn't realize that, and probably still don't even realize that. But one of the things that I think helped me, my understanding, is because I attended the community sessions. So I was there giving the input. I met community members who came, grandfathers and children and everybody else who gave their input. So I understood what I was applying for, what I was getting into when I applied for the grant, and then when I thankfully got the grant. So I had a better understanding than I think most people. But it also provided us an opportunity. Creative Nomads is a new organization, will be 5 this year, but because of BCYF and their demand for a certain level of insurance, but also their ability to fund the grantees with insurance, gave us opportunities to work with other entities. So we worked with, the YMCA, Baltimore City Schools, but because of the level of insurance that we had, allowed us to do that. And as a small nonprofit, having the amount of money to be able to pay for those premiums is not always available. So they gave us the opportunity to do that. But also, we have a few programs that we do, and Drumming with Dad is one of our most popular. But having this particular grant gave us the opportunity to refine the program so that we could have better impacts inside of the schools, but then also to create a curriculum. We were able to go to do professional development. One of our lead drummers, Mr. Changa, is here, Baba Changa, and another drummer that we have that we work with, Baba Isa. We were able to go to Arizona to go to a Fatherhood is Sacred professional development with Native Americans because their culture is very similar to African culture. And we learned a lot. And I was able to refine the program, the curriculum, and able, outside of the grant program in the fall, to implement it at one of the schools to see what we were doing and how, if we received a continuation grant, how we could do better with our program. But also it gives us the opportunity too, because we are creating a curriculum, to be able to not implement it just in Baltimore, but hopefully in other school systems. So this grant has given us an opportunity, which as a small nonprofit, to be able to do a whole lot more in impacting our community, but other communities that look like us. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else from the public that would like to testify? If you could state your name and your
Chango and
organization.
Yango. Check. All right, here we go. So, a couple of comments. Just wanted to reiterate something I heard Nika Namdi say. There's a social justice piece that undergirds all of this. And so those of us who understand the philanthropy industry, the nonprofit sector, we understand that there's an inherent silence and an elephant in the room whenever you say nonprofit, whenever you say philanthropy, whenever you set the scene as if we're giving something away to people who don't have. All right? And so I just want to challenge us to change our thinking about that in general. All right? Because the citizens of Baltimore, especially the ones who are benefiting from these programs, we owe them every penny and more. We're not giving anything. Right? So I want us to really think about that. That's justice. The second piece is I work with Fusion Partnerships, which is the only independent fiscal sponsor in the city of its size dedicated to social justice, 20-year-old organization. I think we have 12. We have 12 of the grantees under our fiscal sponsorship umbrella. And as I've been involved with the organization, first as a consultant, outside consultant, and now as the board president, there's a couple of things that I really want to make the public understand. Fiscal sponsorship is a hard job. It is a hard job. Mainly because it does not ever, almost never, produce the revenue needed to actually do the service well. Okay. What does that mean? That means that as an organizational development guy, right, who helps people structure things so it makes sense and sustainable, I understood in the first month of being introduced to fiscal sponsorship that you must have a tier that are big people getting $1 million who almost never call you, right? Who call you for like 3 checks a month. And then you have this middle tier of people who are getting this middle chunk of money in the hundreds of thousands who are calling you a little bit more regularly. Maybe they got payroll and stuff like that you can outsource. And that will allow you, having both of those tiers at 10 or 12% will allow you to help the under $50,000 group. Because the under $50,000 group typically is going to call you 3 times every single day. And they are going to need a meeting 2 or 3 times every single week. And they're going to call you on the weekend, and then they're going to triple all of that in emails. And you are going to say or provide this technical assistance 5 times the same technical assistance to the same people because of you have to orient them. You have to completely, it's a startup, right? Back to the previous comment. You are literally dealing with a startup. And so the idea that 10 or 12 or even 15% in some cases is enough off of the grant to do that is absurd. Literally absurd. You talk to my accountant, he will say, I don't know how you do this. And then when, for whatever reason, political reason or what have you, the spotlight of scrutiny comes onto a process and everybody gets their gallbladder a little, a whole centimeter smaller, right? Because of whatever pressure. And now we want to see every cent. And now we want to do this over. And again, to a previous person who testifies point, at a certain point, it becomes accounting, not accountability. And we don't need extreme accounting. Our city has going on $4 billion as a budget every year. And there's whole departments that haven't had proper audits. We all know this. And so what sense does it make that us as an entity would then look at be under $50,000 recipient and say, oh, you're missing $8, a receipt for $8 over here. So we push back on the idea that rolls downhill like that pressure rolls downhill. And I'm just speaking for my grantees, right, who are under enough pressure. So the last thing I want to say is the Youth Fund is a startup. It's just finishing its startup process. It is still, would you say, 5, 7 years off from the point where it's actually going to learn how to fully stand on 10 toes. This is from an organizational development person. I'm telling you, it's at least 7 years where it's actually going to stand up on all 10 toes and be able to be sustainable and be very smooth, all right? Right now, we're still counting months, family. So the scrutiny, let's chill a little bit. Overall, we're doing great work. It's a great idea. I'm glad to see that from those participatory budgeting conversations years ago to now that we've actually gotten out that first $12 million. Like, I just think that deserves right? Kinda, right? So thank you guys again. Yeah, that's it. I could go further, but we'll leave it right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public that would like to testify? All right, so I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Diane, you want to say something? Okay.
Thank you. I know it's late.
Sorry.
I know it's late. Thank you. I also just want to thank in terms of it all is really about a belief in our community. It really is all about that. And we owe it to take the time to develop the right infrastructure, to invest, because it is about investment. It's not a grant, it's about investment in terms of our future. But I do want to be clear in terms of framing ABC's role in terms of that for us, what the body of work that is our work, our core work, is deeply our passion and our investment as well. That we know from the data, because we're a research-based organization, if we don't pay attention to the impact of structural racism as it bears out in the workforce ecosystem, that we're not going to be able to sustain the city in terms of much of brown and black people do not move up in terms of even have the opportunity to gain the assets necessary. And that for us, impacting that ecosystem from public policy other, is helping everyone develop a racial equity lens. That is our passion, that is our core. And so for us, it's not about not wanting to do the youth fund anymore. It is not that at all. It is equally this same space where we're focused on and changing the outcomes for this city, that we are down that pathway. And if we don't stay focused in terms of that, because this youth fund deserves 1,001% of anybody's attention. It should not be somebody that's sitting there that I'm also managing, everything else I'm managing, and 50% of my time has to be focused as well to make sure the youth fund is successful. I want a successful youth fund, but I also want a successful organization that I don't deep dive us in that process. So I just wanted to be clear, it's not about not wanting it, it's about being clear that we've got to give our all and not shortchange any of this.
So again, I think what we've heard clearly tonight is that this is an incredibly important project and process for Baltimore, that there is reflection to be done, that there is learnings to be had, but that the youth fund is critically important to how this city changes and grows and develops. I do thank the administration for their belief in this work. Again, thank you to Diane, to Davon, to all the folks that have made it a reality instead of just a really good idea. And we have work to do. We need to tighten up. We need to tell our story. I think there was a previous point about just sort of the message that's out there publicly. I think the videos are pretty incredible. I thought just hearing from the young people and from the grantees, we got to figure out some ways to get that message out there. And we all have to tighten up for this next piece around this permanent intermediary, because July is right around the corner. And so to the previous point, I hope to see some really, really close communication between all the stakeholders that we heard tonight, because I think that Baltimore cannot afford to not get this right, because it is an important process. So again, thank you to everyone for coming out. This hearing is concluded.